They took his house. They took his car. They took his 8-year-old daughter, then left him sleeping on cold concrete inside an abandoned garage with a few $100s and a rusted toolbox. But this is not a story about a man who lost everything. This is a story about what happens when the wrong people underestimate the right man. Nathan Cole had a secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and the people who destroyed his life had no idea what was coming for them. Stay with me until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The smell hit him first. Motor oil, old rubber, and something faintly metallic. The particular scent of a place that had been left alone too long. Nathan Cole stood in the doorway of Bay 3 at Delmarva Auto and Repair on a Tuesday evening in early November, a duffel bag hanging from one shoulder and a wooden toolbox tucked under his arm, and he looked at the space that was going to be his home. Not temporary housing, not a transitional apartment or a friend's couch. A garage bay, 11 feet wide, maybe 20 deep, a cracked drain in the center of the floor, a single fluorescent tube overhead that flickered every 4 seconds like it was debating whether to give up entirely. A folding cot pushed against the far wall, which his friend Darnell had set up that morning and covered with a sleeping bag that still had a camping store tag on it. Nathan set the duffel down on the concrete. He didn't say anything for a long time. There wasn't anything worth saying. 3 weeks earlier, he had been sitting in a beige conference room on the 14th floor of a family law firm in Annapolis, Maryland, watching a woman he had once loved sign documents that transferred their house, their vehicle, their joint savings account, and primary custody of their daughter to herself, while her attorney, a trim man in an expensive suit who never once made eye contact with Nathan, walked through the settlement terms in a flat, businesslike voice, as though he were reading instructions for assembling furniture. Nathan's own attorney, a tired-looking man named Gerald Fitch, who charged $240 an hour, and apparently used that money to fund a mild but persistent distraction problem, had leaned over at one point and whispered, "You sure you don't want to push back on the vehicle? That's a $38,000 asset." Nathan had looked across the table at his ex-wife, Claire. She was 31 years old, with dark hair pulled back neatly and an expression that had settled somewhere between satisfaction and careful neutrality. Beside her sat Marcus Hale, her fiancé, 44 years old, a real estate developer from the Eastern Shore with a sharp jaw and the particular confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life been told he couldn't have something he wanted. Marcus wasn't a party to the proceedings. He had no legal standing to be in that room, but he was there anyway, in a charcoal blazer, one ankle crossed over his knee, occasionally murmuring something to Claire's attorney that Nathan couldn't hear. Nathan had looked at Claire for a long moment. Then he had turned back to Gerald Fitch and said quietly, "Let it go." Nathan, let it go, Gerald. He had signed everything they put in front of him. Not because he was broken, not because he didn't understand what he was giving up, because the only thing in that room he actually cared about was an 8-year-old girl named Lily who was, at that precise moment, sitting in a waiting area down the hall with a coloring book and a babysitter Claire had hired, and Nathan needed to be careful. He needed to be very, very careful about the next few months. And fighting over a house and an SUV was not the kind of careful he had in mind. Mas, Lily. Claire Cole had her father's eyes, gray-green, the color of the Chesapeake on a cloudy afternoon, and her mother's stubborn streak, which she deployed with devastating precision at random intervals and usually at the worst possible times. She was 8 years old and in the 3rd grade at Pinewood Elementary. She had strong opinions about which brand of apple juice was acceptable, had recently developed an interest in drawing horses that she couldn't actually draw yet, but kept practicing anyway, and she still, on nights when something had upset her, reached for Nathan's hand in a particular way, fingers curling around 2 of his, that made it physically difficult for him to breathe normally. Under the custody arrangement Claire's attorney had structured, Nathan had Lily every other weekend and one Wednesday evening per month. Every other weekend. One Wednesday. Nathan had read those words on the document 17 times in the parking garage after the signing, sitting in the front seat of the 10-year-old Civic he'd borrowed from Darnell, and he had pressed his forehead against the steering wheel and stayed like that for about 6 minutes. Then he'd sat up, started the car, and driven to the garage. What? Darnell Washington was 40 years old, broad-shouldered, and had been Nathan's closest friend since they were both 15 and had both ended up in the same summer automotive program at a vocational center in Baltimore. He owned Delmarva Auto and Repair outright, had bought out the previous owner 4 years ago, and ran it with 2 full-time mechanics and a rotating cast of part-time help that fluctuated depending on the season and how many people Darnell had recently fired for showing up late. He was not a sentimental man. He did not make speeches or offer long explanations for the things he did. When Nathan had called him from the parking garage and explained the situation in a voice that was carefully, deliberately controlled, Darnell had been quiet for about 4 seconds and then said, "Bay 3 is empty. I'll put a cot in there." "Darnell, there's a bathroom in the back with a working shower, cold water, but it works. I'll get a space heater." "I can't. You can pay me back whenever. Don't make it weird." And that had been that. The first week was the hardest, though Nathan would not have admitted that to anyone who asked. He woke at 5:30 every morning to the sound of Darnell's first mechanic arriving, a quiet, methodical man named Pete who wore the same gray coveralls every day and communicated primarily through small grunts that somehow conveyed a surprisingly wide emotional range. Nathan learned to be out of Bay 3 by 6, either working alongside Pete and the others or sitting in the small office at the back of the shop with a cup of coffee, going through the job listings on Darnell's ancient desktop computer. He had skills, that was not the problem. Nathan had grown up working on cars alongside his father, had spent his teenage years in shops like this one, understood engines and electrical systems and fabrication in a way that was instinctive rather than learned. Darnell put him to work immediately and paid him a fair hourly rate, and Nathan was grateful for that in a way he didn't have the language to express properly. The problem was the evenings, after the shop closed at 6, after Pete and the other mechanic, a young guy named Carlos who played music through a Bluetooth speaker and had excellent taste, packed up and left. And after Darnell locked the front bay doors and headed home to his wife and 2 kids, Nathan was alone in the garage with the fluorescent light and the sleeping bag and the particular specific silence of a space that was built for machinery and not for people. He had a phone. He had a laptop with a cracked hinge that he'd bought secondhand. He had books, a small stack of them that he'd grabbed from the apartment he'd lived in for the 6 months between leaving the marital home and the final settlement, paperback thrillers mostly, bought from a used bookstore because he'd always read to fall asleep, and old habits are the last things to go. But on those evenings, he didn't read much. Mostly, he sat on the edge of the cot and thought about Lily. "Shai, Auntie Jama, move my sheets," he called her every night at 7:30. That was the arrangement. Claire had agreed to it, though her attorney had made a point of specifying that it was a courtesy, not a right, and that Nathan should bear that in mind. Nathan bore it in mind. The calls usually lasted between 12 and 20 minutes. Lily would tell him about school, what happened at lunch, whether her teacher had done something annoying, what she was drawing, and Nathan would listen and ask questions and try to make her laugh, which wasn't hard because he knew exactly which kinds of jokes worked on her and which fell flat. "Dad, Carlos at school said horses can't actually swim," she told him one evening, about 10 days after he'd moved into the garage. "But I looked it up and they can. They're actually really good swimmers." "Excellent research," Nathan said. "You should tell Carlos." "I did. He said I was wrong even though I showed him the video." "Some people are committed to being wrong. That's what you always say. Because it's always true." She laughed. That specific laugh she had, slightly surprised, like she hadn't expected to find something funny. And Nathan pressed the phone against his ear a little harder and looked at the ceiling of Bay 3 and counted the cracks in the plaster. When they hung up, the silence came back differently. 1. He had $260 when he moved into the garage. After the first week of working for Darnell, he had $410. He kept a small notebook, spiral-bound, blue cover, in which he tracked every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out. Food was the main expense. He ate simply and cheaply, mostly groceries from the discount store 3 blocks over, cooked on a single-burner hot plate he'd found in the back of the shop. He didn't drink, which helped. He didn't smoke. He had almost no entertainment expenses because there was almost nothing to entertain. The custody evaluator, a woman named Dr. Pam Ingalls, was scheduled to visit his living situation at the end of the month as part of the ongoing custody process. Nathan had 30 days to make Bay 3 look like a reasonable place for a child to visit. He thought about that every morning when he woke up on the cot. He was not panicking. He understood panic to be a largely useless response to solvable problems. And this was a solvable problem. He needed a better space, or at least the credible appearance of one. He needed to demonstrate stability. He needed to be patient in a way that felt physically painful, the way holding your breath for too long feels, the pressure building behind your sternum while everything in you wants to simply open your mouth and say what's true. But he couldn't say what was true. Not yet. There was a document, a confidentiality agreement, thick with legal language, that he had signed years ago and that was still very much in effect. A document that prevented him from disclosing his involvement in a company called Centurion Energy, its financial structure, his ownership stake, or anything related to a pending corporate transaction that was, as of that November, approximately 4 to 6 months from becoming public knowledge. He had signed it willingly, back when the terms had made sense. He had not anticipated ending up sleeping on a cot in a garage when he signed it. Centurion Energy had started as a conversation between Nathan and 2 other men in a rented lab space in Delaware in the early years of the previous decade. Nathan was 24. His partners, Elliot Marsh and a materials scientist named David Cho, were slightly older, more credentialed, but less certain than Nathan about what they were actually building. Nathan had a particular way of seeing problems. He didn't see technology as a collection of components to be optimized separately. He saw it as a system, interconnected and dynamic, where a change in one place rippled through everything else. That way of thinking had led him, through a chain of logic that he'd once tried to explain to Claire and watched her eyes glaze over at around the 4-minute mark, to a breakthrough in energy storage technology that he'd initially sketched out in a notebook. Not entirely different from the blue one he used to track his grocery spending. The patent application had been filed when he was 26. By the time he was 28, the company had venture backing, a small team, and a prototype that was quietly generating interest in sectors Nathan hadn't anticipated. Then Lily was born. And Nathan, who had watched his own father disappear into work during every significant moment of his childhood and had decided, somewhere around age 12, that he would not do the same thing. Nathan looked at his newborn daughter in a hospital in Baltimore on a cold January morning and made a decision. He stepped back. He negotiated a restructured role, limited operational involvement, preserved equity stake, confidentiality provisions that protected both his interests and the company's. And he went home to be a father. Elliot Marsh had shaken his hand at the conclusion of those negotiations and said, "You're making a mistake." Nathan had said, "Probably." He didn't believe it then. He didn't believe it now, sitting on a cot in a garage in November, even though certain aspects of the situation were difficult to argue with. He didn't tell Darnell about Centurion. Couldn't. Darnell knew Nathan was smart, had always known that, in the unspoken way that old friends recognize things in each other without needing to name them. But he didn't know the specifics, and Nathan kept it that way. And some evenings Darnell would come back to the garage after dinner at home, ostensibly to check on a work order, but actually, Nathan understood, to sit on an overturned crate and drink a beer and just be present in a way that required nothing from either of them. Those evenings helped more than Nathan could explain. "You doing okay?" Darnell asked one night, about 3 weeks in. It was cold. The space heater was working hard, and the overhead light was doing its 4-second flickering thing, which Nathan had stopped noticing after the first week. "I'm fine," Nathan said. "Right." Darnell took a sip of his beer. "You look fine. You look like a guy who's doing great." "I'm not doing great, but I'm okay. There's a difference." "There's a meaningful difference, yeah." Darnell was quiet for a moment. Then, "Lily call tonight?" 7:30. "She good?" "She's good. She learned that horses can swim." Darnell looked at him. "That's relevant information." "Apparently." Another silence. The space heater hummed. Something settled in the roof of the building. "You know you can stay here as long as you need," Darnell said. "Not making a big thing of it, just putting it out there." "I know," Nathan said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just fix the transmission on the Buick in Bay 1. Pete keeps avoiding it, and I don't know why." The owner yelled at him. "How do you know that?" "Pete told me." "Pete doesn't talk." "He talks to me a little." Darnell stared at him. "You've been here 3 weeks and Pete talks to you?" He's worked for me for 2 years and has said maybe 40 words. 43, I think. I've been counting. Darnell shook his head slowly. Unbelievable. Nathan almost smiled. Almost. The custody evaluator, Dr. Pam Ingalls, arrived on a gray Thursday morning with a clipboard, sensible shoes, and the practiced expression of a person who had seen many difficult situations and had learned to remain carefully neutral in the face of all of them. She was 50-ish, with reading glasses perched on top of her head, and a manner that was professional without being cold. Nathan had cleaned the bay the night before, scrubbed the floor, organized his few possessions into neat arrangements, hung a framed drawing Lily had made of the two of them, stick figures, inaccurate but enthusiastic, on the wall beside the cot. Dr. Ingalls stood in the doorway and looked at the space for a long moment without saying anything. Nathan stood beside her and waited. "This is where you're currently living," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said. "Temporarily. I'm saving to move into an apartment. I have a timeline." "May I see the bathroom?" "Of course." He walked her through it. The bathroom at the back of the shop was small and not beautiful, but it was functional. He'd replaced the shower head himself and caulked around the base and bought a bath mat and a hook for a towel. Dr. Ingalls made notes on her clipboard. She noted the hot plate, the small stack of Lily's books he'd arranged on a wooden shelf he'd built from scrap lumber, the second sleeping bag folded neatly on top of a cot he'd added for when Lily visited. "Your daughter has visited here?" she asked. "Once, last weekend." "How did she respond to the space?" Nathan thought about Lily standing in the middle of Bay 3, looking around with those gray-green eyes, and then turning to him and saying with complete sincerity, "Dad, this is actually kind of cool. It's like a fort." "She adapted well," he said. "She's a resilient kid." Dr. Ingalls wrote something down. "Mr. Cole, I want to be straightforward with you. The current arrangement reflects some concerns about stability. Your living situation will be a factor in the evaluation." "I understand that. Is there anything you'd like me to know that isn't reflected in the case file?" There was a long pause. Nathan looked at her steadily. "I'm a good father," he said. "I know that's what everyone says, but I've been the primary caregiver for most of Lily's life. I know her schedule, her teachers' names, her food allergies, what frightens her at night, which books she wants read to her when she's sick. I know those things because I was there. The circumstances that have changed recently don't change what I know or what I can give her." Dr. Ingalls held his gaze for a moment. Then she wrote something on her clipboard. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she said. "I'll be in touch." She left at 10:15. Nathan went back into the garage, sat down on the edge of the cot, and put his face in his hands. Not crying. He wasn't crying. He was just still, completely still, in the way that you sometimes have to be when the alternative is something you can't afford. He stayed like that for about 4 minutes. Then he got up, put on his coveralls, and went to work on the Buick in Bay 1. The transmission was a mess. Previous owner had clearly ignored warning signs for months, maybe longer. Nathan pulled it apart methodically, piece by piece, laying everything out in order on a clean shop rag so he'd know exactly where it went back. Pete came to stand in the doorway of the bay around noon and watched him work for a moment. "She leaving?" Pete asked, meaning Dr. Ingalls. "Yeah." "She write a lot down." "They always do." Pete was quiet for a moment. "My sister went through something like this. Custody thing." Nathan looked up. "She okay now," Pete said. "Took a while, but she's okay." It was the longest thing Pete had ever said to him. "Thank you," Nathan said. Pete nodded once and went back to his own bay. 44 words, Nathan updated mentally. Maybe 45. It was Darnell's wife, Renata, who first mentioned Victoria Sterling. She came by the shop on a Friday evening in late November with food. She did this occasionally, not making a production of it, just arriving with containers of something she'd made too much of. And while Nathan was helping her carry things inside, she said, almost casually, "Did you hear they brought in someone new to look at the county welfare program? Some businesswoman, young. I saw her at the community board meeting on Wednesday." Nathan hadn't heard. He hadn't been paying much attention to county news. Apparently she invested a bunch of money in the child welfare reform initiative. Renata continued, setting containers on the small table in the back office. And now she's actually showing up at meetings and asking questions, like real questions, not the kind politicians ask. What kind does she ask? Darnell said, from across the room. The kind that make the county administrator look uncomfortable. Renata smiled. I liked her. Nathan opened a container. Rice, beans, some kind of chicken. His stomach responded immediately and without dignity. What's her name? He asked, mainly to say something. Victoria Sterling, Renata said. You've probably seen her on the news. She does a lot of tech stuff. He hadn't seen her on the news. He didn't watch much news. He made a mental note of the name and then let it go, because he had other things to occupy his attention, and a stranger's philanthropy projects, however well-intentioned, did not rank highly among his current priorities. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. December came in cold and indifferent, the way Maryland Decembers usually did. Gray sky, wind off the bay, the particular kind of chill that gets into old buildings and stays there regardless of what you do about it. Nathan's space heater worked overtime. He wore layers to bed. He had by this point moved past the initial rawness of the situation and into something he recognized from other hard periods in his life. A kind of functional numbness that wasn't quite acceptance, but was at least operational. He got up, he worked, he ate, he called Lily at 7:30, he slept. He did it again. On his weekends with Lily, he made sure they did things that had nothing to do with the garage. They went to the library, which was warm and free and had a section dedicated to horse books that Lily had apparently been working through systematically. They went to the bay, bundled up, walking the shoreline, Lily collecting rocks with the intensity of a professional geologist and explaining to Nathan why each one was significant. They cooked together on the hot plate, which was admittedly limited, but which Lily had decided was actually better than a regular stove, because you can only make one thing at a time, so you have to focus, Dad. She was 8 years old, and sometimes she said things that stopped him cold. He was under the Buick, a different Buick, the shop seemed to attract them, on a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of December, when Darnell appeared at the edge of the bay and said, in an odd voice, "There's someone here to see you." Nathan rolled out from under the car. "Customer?" "No." Darnell paused. "She says she's with the County Welfare Oversight Committee. Something about your custody case." Nathan sat up slowly. "She asked for me specifically?" "By name." He wiped his hands on a rag and stood up. His coveralls had a grease stain across the left side that he became briefly aware of and then decided not to care about. He walked to the front of the shop. She was standing near the entrance, looking at the framed automotive certificates on the wall with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than polite killing time interest, a distinction Nathan had learned to read accurately. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair and the particular posture of someone who was used to being the most competent person in most rooms. She entered and had simply stopped performing modesty about it. She wore a coat that was well made but not flashy, and she was carrying a leather portfolio under one arm. She turned when she heard him coming. "Nathan Cole?" "That's me." She looked at him for a beat, not the quick assessment and file away that most people did, but something slightly more deliberate, like she was reading something she wasn't sure she understood yet. "I'm Victoria Sterling," she said. "I'm sorry to come unannounced. I tried calling the number on file and it went to voicemail." "Phone died this morning," he said. "I forgot to charge it." "I can come back." "It's fine. What's this about?" She glanced around the shop, not judging, just orienting herself. "Is there somewhere we could talk?" He thought about the back office, with its ancient desktop and Renata's food containers, and the general organized chaos of a working garage. He thought about Bay 3, with his cot and his books. "There's a coffee place 2 blocks over," he said. "I can take 15 minutes." She nodded. "That works." The coffee place was called Milltown, and it was small and warm and perpetually slightly too crowded, with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and the kind of background noise that made conversation feel more private than it actually was. They sat across from each other at a table near the window. Nathan had a black coffee. Victoria Sterling had something with oat milk that she didn't appear to be particularly invested in. She opened the leather portfolio and set a document on the table between them. It was a copy of the custody evaluation summary. Nathan looked at it, then he looked at her. How did you get that? The Oversight Committee has access to case files when there are concerns flagged during review, she said. I've been going through a backlog of evaluations from the past 18 months. Yours came up. Came up how? She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words. There are some irregularities in the documentation. The evaluation timeline is unusual. The home visit report contains language that appears in 3 other recent cases almost word for word, which suggests either a template being used inappropriately or something more deliberate. Nathan was very still. I'm not here to make promises, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have authority to intervene in ongoing proceedings, but I do have the ability to ask questions and flag things for further review, and I think that's warranted here. What kind of questions? Ones I'd like to start with you, if you're willing. The coffee was too hot, but Nathan drank it anyway. Ask, he said. She asked good questions. Not the questions he'd been asked by lawyers and evaluators and the well-meaning acquaintances who'd heard about the divorce through the specific social grapevine that forms around the wreckage of a marriage. Not what happened, or how are you doing, or are you sure you can't afford a better attorney? She asked about Lily specifically. Lily's school performance, Lily's social relationships, Lily's emotional state during the transition. She asked about the timeline of the custody evaluation, who had appointed Dr. Ingalls, and whether Nathan had been given the opportunity to review the evaluation criteria in advance. He hadn't. She wrote something down. She asked about Marcus Hale. Carefully, precisely, watching Nathan's face as she did. Nathan kept his face neutral. He was present at the settlement meeting, which seemed unusual to me. Did you raise that with your attorney? Gerald Fitch, yes. He said it was irregular, but not grounds for anything. Was Mr. Hale involved in the process at any other point that you're aware of? I have suspicions, Nathan said. I don't have proof. She looked at him for a moment. Suspicions about what specifically? He considered how to say it. About the timing, he said finally. About why things moved the way they moved, when they moved. About whether certain decisions were made for the reasons given. That's vague. Deliberately. A pause. Mr. Cole, she said, is there something you're not able to tell me? He met her eyes. She was sharper than anyone he'd spoken to in months. He registered that clearly. There are things I'm contractually prevented from discussing, he said. Yes. Her expression didn't change much, but something shifted in it. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition, the way someone looks when a puzzle piece clicks into a position they'd suspected but not confirmed. Understood, she said. She didn't push. That, Nathan thought, was interesting. They were there for 45 minutes. When they left, standing briefly on the sidewalk outside in the December cold, Victoria Sterling put a business card in his hand and said, I'm going to continue reviewing the file. If anything changes in your situation, legally or otherwise, I'd appreciate you letting me know. Why? Nathan said. Not hostile, genuinely curious. She looked at him. Because something about this case doesn't add up, she said. And I don't do well with things that don't add up. She said it simply, without drama, and then walked to her car. A dark blue sedan, sensible, nothing ostentatious, and drove away. Nathan stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment, turning the business card over in his hand. Then he walked back to the garage, climbed under the Buick, and kept working. Oh. That night at 7:30, Lily called him before he could call her. Dad. Hey, Bug, I was just about to... Dad, I learned something really important today. Tell me. Elephants are scared of bees. He blinked. Is that true? Yes, they run away from them, even though they're huge. Scientists actually use bees to keep elephants away from farms. Lily, that's fascinating. I know. I think it means that being big doesn't mean you're not scared of things. Nathan sat on the edge of the cot in Bay 3, in the cold garage, with the flickering light and the sleeping bag and the framed drawing on the wall. That's exactly what it means, he said. Are you scared of things, Dad? The question landed with no particular weight from her end. She was 8. She was curious about everything. Yeah, he said. Sometimes. What are you scared of? He thought about it. Honestly, for a moment, actually thought about it. Losing time with you, he said. Silence on the line. Then, you're not going to lose time with me, Dad. No? No. Because I'll remember everything. So even when we're not together, you're still there. Because I remember. He pressed the phone against his ear, looked at the ceiling, counted the cracks. When did you get so smart? He said, when he trusted his voice again. I've always been smart, she said with complete confidence. You just keep being surprised. He laughed. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't an almost. That. Outside, the wind came off the Chesapeake and moved through the gap under the bay doors and rattled something in the rafters. The fluorescent light flickered, 4 seconds, then steady, then 4 seconds again. Nathan Cole lay back on the cot in Bay 3, still in his coveralls, staring at the ceiling. He was a man sleeping in a garage. He was a man who had signed away a house, a car, and more time with his daughter than he knew how to stand. He was a man with a secret that could change everything, locked behind a legal document he couldn't break. And somewhere in a county building, a woman with a leather portfolio and questions that actually mattered was sitting with a copy of his custody evaluation, looking at irregularities that she did not intend to leave unexplained. He didn't know what that meant yet. He wasn't sure he could afford to hope. But he lay there in the cold garage, in the borrowed sleeping bag, and for the first time in weeks he didn't count the minutes until morning. He just let himself be still. And somewhere across the county, Lily was sleeping with the light on. She'd always needed that, even as a baby. And she was 8 years old and believed, with complete certainty, that her father was going to be okay. Sometimes that has to be enough. For now, it was. Victoria Sterling did not sleep well on the best of nights. This was not a new problem. It had started somewhere around age 19, when she'd launched her first company out of a rented room in Pittsburgh and discovered that the mind she'd been given, the one that processed information fast, cross-referenced constantly, and refused to stop running even when the rest of her was exhausted, did not come with an off switch. She'd made peace with it over the years. 4 or 5 hours was usually enough. She kept a notepad on the nightstand for the thoughts that arrived at 2 in the morning with the specific urgency of something that cannot wait until 6. On the night after she met Nathan Cole, she filled 3 pages. She sat at the desk in her hotel room. She was staying at a mid-range place in Annapolis while she worked through the county's case backlog, having decided that commuting from her apartment in Baltimore every day was inefficient, and she spread the documents out under the lamp and went through them again. The custody evaluation, the settlement terms, the court scheduling records, the financial disclosures Nathan had submitted as part of the proceedings. The financial disclosures were the thing that had first caught her attention 3 days before she'd driven to the garage. On paper, Nathan Cole was a mechanic with minimal assets and no significant income history beyond hourly wage work. The disclosures showed a man who had spent the last several years doing contract automotive work and living simply, with no investments, no property, no financial holdings of any consequence. Victoria had looked at those disclosures for a long time. Then she'd pulled his name through 3 different databases she had legitimate access to through her business interests, and what she'd found, or more precisely, what she hadn't found, the particular shape of an absence, had made the back of her neck go tight in the way it did when something wasn't adding up, and she hadn't figured out why yet. Nathan Cole did not exist in the professional record the way a person should. No LinkedIn history. No professional affiliations beyond the automotive work. No published anything. No conference appearances. No industry mentions. For most people, that would be unremarkable. For a man who was clearly, and she had registered this in the first 4 minutes of their conversation at Milltown, operating at a significantly higher intellectual level than his current circumstances suggested. It was strange. People left traces. Especially smart people. Smart people who had done things left trails of those things, even when they tried to minimize them. Unless the absence was deliberate. Unless someone had worked to make the absence deliberate. She wrote, confidentiality agreement. What kind? Corporate, NDA, non-compete? And then below that, timing. He said timing. Why does timing matter? She stared at that for a while. Then she wrote one more thing. He's not hiding because he's ashamed. He's hiding because he's protecting something. She underlined it twice and went to make coffee at the small machine on the hotel dresser because it was 11:15 and she was nowhere near done. Victoria Sterling had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in western Pennsylvania, the daughter of a woman who cleaned office buildings at night and a father who had worked in a steel distribution warehouse until his back gave out when Victoria was 12, and the family's financial situation became, for a period of several years, genuinely precarious. She had gotten through college on merit scholarships and a level of focused determination that her professors had found either admirable or alarming, depending on their individual dispositions. She'd built her first company at 19, sold it at 22, built a second at 23 that was now a mid-sized tech firm with offices in 4 cities, and had been called in various publications a visionary, a disruptor, and Chong, in one memorable profile she had not enjoyed, relentlessly transactional. That last one had bothered her more than she'd admitted to anyone, mainly because she recognized the grain of truth in it. She was good at identifying problems and solving them efficiently, and she was not always careful about whether the efficiency came at the cost of something less quantifiable. She knew this about herself. She was working on it. The Child Welfare Initiative had been part of working on it. She'd invested in it not as a tax strategy or a public relations move, though her advisors had noted the PR benefits with enthusiasm, but because she'd spent an afternoon 3 years ago in a county family services office for reasons unrelated to her business interests. And she'd watched the way the system processed people, and something in her had gone very quiet and very certain in the way it did when she saw a problem she could actually affect. She wasn't naive about what money could and couldn't fix, but it could fix some things. And sitting in meetings asking uncomfortable questions was, it turned out, something she was well suited for. The Nathan Cole file was case number 47 in the current review batch. She had not expected it to be the one that kept her up at night. She poured the coffee, sat back down, and kept working. By 2 a.m, she had a list of 7 specific irregularities she wanted to pursue. By 3, she'd drafted the formal inquiry request she'd file with the oversight board in the morning. By 3:45, she was lying on top of the hotel bedspread, still in her clothes, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Nathan Cole had said, "There are things I'm contractually prevented from discussing," flat, factual, with no self-pity in it, like he was simply reporting a condition of the weather. She thought about the grease stain on his coveralls. She thought about the framed child's drawing she'd glimpsed through the open door of Bay 3 when she'd walked past it on her way to find him. 2 stick figures, uneven and enthusiastic, standing side by side. She thought about the fact that a man who had apparently chosen to give up everything material in a divorce settlement without a fight had looked at her across a coffee shop table with eyes that were completely, entirely calm. Not resigned, not defeated, just steady. Like a person who knew something nobody else in the room knew and had decided to be patient about it. She fell asleep somewhere around 4:15 with the notepad still open on the bed beside her. She dreamed about numbers. She usually did. The formal inquiry went to the oversight board on Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, she had a response indicating that Dr. Pam Ingalls had conducted 14 custody evaluations in the past year and a half through the county's contracted evaluator program, and that the program itself had been established through a procurement process that had occurred, Victoria noted, approximately 8 months after Marcus Hale had made a significant contribution to the county commissioner's re-election campaign. She read that 3 times. Then she called her assistant, a sharp 26-year-old named Drew, who had the specific quality of never sounding surprised by anything Victoria told him, and said, "I need everything publicly available on Marcus Hale. Business filings, property records, any litigation history, anything connected to county contracting in the past 3 years." "How fast?" Drew said. "Yesterday." "So this afternoon." "That works." She hung up and called the Oversight Board's legal liaison to ask about the scope of the committee's subpoena authority, which was a question that made the liaison noticeably uncomfortable, which in turn told Victoria something useful. She spent Friday going through what Drew sent her. Marcus Hale was 44 years old and had built a real estate development company over the previous 15 years that now had projects across the Eastern Shore and into the Baltimore suburbs. He was connected, the kind of connected that comes from a decade and a half of donations and board memberships and attending the right events and being careful about which relationships he cultivated. He was not visibly corrupt. He was the kind of man who didn't need to be visibly corrupt because he operated in spaces where the lines were blurry enough that most things he wanted to do were technically permissible. Most things. There was one thread that Drew had flagged at the bottom of his report, almost as an afterthought. A business entity called Halcyon Advisory Group, registered in Delaware 2 years ago, with Marcus Hale listed as a managing partner. The company's stated purpose was vague: strategic consulting and asset management, and its client list was not public. But one of its registered agents had also worked, in a previous role, as outside counsel for a venture capital fund that had invested in an energy company Nathan had never mentioned by name, but that Victoria was increasingly certain existed. She sat with that for a long time. She did not yet have enough to connect the dots clearly. What she had was a shape, the outline of something, and a strong professional instinct that the shape was significant. She went back to the garage on Saturday morning. She hadn't called ahead. She wasn't sure why, except that unannounced arrivals sometimes showed you things that scheduled ones didn't. Nathan was in the parking area outside the shop, crouched next to an old truck with the hood up, doing something to the engine that involved a tool she didn't recognize and a level of focus that meant he didn't notice her until she was about 10 feet away. He looked up, registered her without visible surprise. "Ms. Sterling." "Victoria," she said. "Ms. Sterling makes me feel like a substitute teacher." Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not quite a smile. The precursor to one, maybe. "Okay," he said. She looked at the truck. "What's wrong with it?" "Fuel injector, 3rd cylinder." "Is that bad?" "Depends on how long you've been ignoring it." "In general, or in this specific case?" "This specific case? About 8 months too long." He stood up, wiped his hands. "You drove out here on a Saturday." "I did." "Find something?" She looked at him steadily. "A shape," she said. "Not a full picture yet?" He seemed to understand exactly what she meant. "How long until it's a full picture?" "That depends on whether I can access certain records that are currently being made difficult to access." "Who's making them difficult?" "People connected to people you might know." He held her gaze. "Hale." She didn't confirm it directly. She didn't need to. "I'm going to need to ask you some things that may feel intrusive." "More intrusive than showing up at my garage on a Saturday?" "Probably." He considered that for a moment. Then he pulled a rag from his pocket, cleaned his hands more thoroughly, and said, "There's coffee in the back. It's not good coffee, but it's hot." She followed him inside. The back office of Delmarva Auto was smaller than she'd registered on her first visit. There was a desk covered in work orders, a filing cabinet, a coffee maker that had seen better years, and 2 chairs that didn't match. A child's drawing was taped to the filing cabinet. Horses, unmistakably, though rendered with more enthusiasm than technical accuracy. Nathan poured 2 cups and handed her one. She wrapped both hands around it. "Your daughter draws horses," she said. "She's working on it," he said. "The proportions are improving." "What's her name?" "Lily." Victoria looked at the drawing for a moment. The horses were wild-looking, all flying legs and wide eyes, full of motion even in crayon. They were, she thought, actually not bad, just unpolished. "How is she doing?" she asked. "Really?" Nathan sat down in one of the mismatched chairs. He looked tired, not the acute tiredness of a bad night, but the accumulated tiredness of several weeks of sustained difficulty. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that probably hadn't been there a year ago. "She's 8, he said. "She's resilient in ways that make me feel inadequate by comparison, but she asks questions I don't always know how to answer." "Like what?" He looked at his coffee. "Like why she can't come here more. Like why things changed. Like..." He stopped. "Like why things happen the way they do, when they didn't have to happen that way." "What do you tell her?" "That some things take time to fix, that I'm working on it." He paused. "That I love her, and that's not going to change regardless of anything else." Victoria nodded slowly. Then she opened the portfolio she'd been carrying and put 3 documents on the desk between them. "I want to walk you through what I've found," she said. "I want your reaction, not your legal analysis, just your reaction, to the timeline I'm going to show you. Can you do that?" He looked at the documents. "Yes." She walked him through it. 15 minutes, methodical, watching his face the whole time. She showed him the procurement timeline for the evaluator program and the Hale campaign contribution. She showed him the formation date of Halcyon Advisory Group and the connection she'd found to the VC fund. She showed him the dates, the specific sequence of dates around the divorce filing and the custody evaluation scheduling, and asked him if those dates corresponded with anything he remembered. He was very still while she talked. When she finished, he sat back in the chair and was quiet for a long moment. "The evaluation was moved up," he said finally. "Originally it was scheduled for February. It got moved to October. I was told it was a scheduling issue." "It wasn't a scheduling issue," Victoria said. "No," he said. "I don't think it was." Another silence. Something moved through his face that she couldn't entirely name. Not anger, or not only that. Something more complex. The expression of a person who has suspected something for a long time and is now having that suspicion confirmed and is discovering that confirmation doesn't feel as good as it should because the thing that's being confirmed is a particular kind of betrayal. "Nathan," she said, and using his first name felt appropriate in a way it hadn't a week ago. "I need to understand something. The confidentiality agreement you mentioned, is it connected to all of this?" He looked at her for a long time. She waited. She was good at waiting when it mattered. "I can't answer that directly," he said finally, "but I can tell you—" He stopped, started again, more carefully. "I can tell you that there are people who had a specific interest in the timing of this divorce, not for personal reasons, for financial ones." "Financial reasons connected to you?" "Connected to something that involves me." She absorbed that. And the timeline, the custody evaluation being moved up, the settlement being finalized when it was, that timing was not accidental. It wasn't a question. "No," he said quietly. "I don't believe it was." She wrote something in the portfolio. He watched her write it without asking what it was. "I'm going to need to bring in some people I trust," she said, "a forensic accountant and an attorney who specializes in custody fraud. This is beyond the scope of what the Oversight Committee can do alone. That costs money." "I have money," she said simply. Not bragging, just a fact, the way he'd stated the terms of his confidentiality. He looked at her. "Why?" She looked back at him. It was the same question he'd asked on the sidewalk outside Milltown, and she'd had a week to think about a better answer than the one she'd given him then. "Because I've seen what happens when the system doesn't get questioned," she said, "and because I'm good at questions." He was quiet for a moment. The coffee maker made a sound. Outside, a car pulled into the lot, and then apparently thought better of it, and left. "Lily had a dentist appointment last Tuesday," Nathan said, out of nowhere. Victoria blinked. "Okay, Claire took her, which is fine. Claire is her mother, and it's fine. But Lily called me afterward, and she'd had a filling, and she was upset about it, and she wanted me to come over, and I couldn't." He paused. "I couldn't because the arrangement doesn't allow for it. And I sat in this office, and I thought—" He stopped himself, pressed his mouth into a line. "I thought about a lot of things." "What things?" "Things I'm not allowed to fix yet," he said. "Things that need to stay broken for a little while longer before I can fix them." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "How much longer?" "I don't know exactly. A few months, maybe less." She nodded. She didn't push. She was starting to understand that pushing Nathan Cole was not the way to get things from Nathan Cole. He operated on his own internal clock, and the clock was winding toward something. She could feel it, the way you can sometimes feel a change in air pressure before the weather turns. She put her card on the desk. "Call me if anything shifts, on your end or on the legal end. You left a card last time. I'm leaving another one, in case you lost the first." He picked it up, looked at it. "Victoria Sterling, Sterling Ventures. That's straightforward. I'm not complicated." He looked at her over the card in a way that made her think he found that slightly debatable, but he didn't say so. Instead, he said, "Thank you for coming back." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I haven't done anything useful yet." She left him in the back office with the bad coffee and the horse drawings and whatever it was he was carrying that he couldn't put down yet. And she drove back toward Annapolis with the heat in the car turned up and her mind already 3 steps ahead. She was not a person who second-guessed herself often. She'd learned that second-guessing was mostly a way of spending energy on a decision that had already been made. But somewhere on Route 50, with the bay visible in the distance on her left and the winter sun sitting low and flat over the water, she found herself doing it anyway. Not about the investigation, about the meeting, About the coffee in the back office, and the horse drawings, and the particular way he'd said Lily every time his daughter's name came up, the way some words carry more weight than their syllables should allow. She filed that observation away in the back of her mind, in the place where she kept things she wasn't ready to examine yet, and focused on the road. Drew called at 12:30. She answered on Bluetooth. "I found something," he said, without preamble. "Tell me." Halcyon Advisory Group filed an amended client disclosure with the state 18 months ago. It's technically public record, but buried. One of their listed consulting engagements is with a holding company called Meridian Capital Partners. Meridian Capital Partners has a significant equity position in... He paused, and she heard the sound of him pulling something up on his screen. A company called Centurion Energy. Victoria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Say that again." Centurion Energy, clean tech startup, Delaware Incorporation, private. Not much public information. They've been quiet. But there's an industry rumor that's been circulating in energy sector newsletters for the past couple months about a major acquisition that's supposedly in the pipeline. Nobody's confirmed it publicly. She was very still. "Drew," she said, "who are Centurion Energy's founders? Is that public?" "Partially. Two names associated with early patent filings, an Elliot Marsh and a David Cho. Third name on some early filings, but redacted from more recent documents." A pause. "The redaction is consistent across multiple filings. Someone worked to remove it." "Nathan Cole," she said. Silence on Drew's end. "I can't confirm that," he said carefully. "Not from what I have." "No," she said. "But it fits." She drove the rest of the way to Annapolis in silence, running the numbers in her head. Not the specific numbers, which she didn't have, but the shape of them. The timing of a divorce. The timing of a custody evaluation that had been moved up by 4 months. The timing of a confidentiality agreement that prevented a man from explaining why his financial disclosures looked the way they did. And somewhere in the future, months away, maybe less, an acquisition announcement that would make the equity stake of a silent co-founder worth more money than most people saw in a lifetime. She pulled into the hotel parking garage, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark car for a moment. They hadn't taken his money. They couldn't touch that. The confidentiality agreement and the corporate structure protected it. So they'd taken everything else. The house, the car, the daily access to his daughter. They'd stripped him of every visible asset and every credible source of income and left him looking, on paper, like a man with nothing, like a man who had no leverage, like a man who could be managed and minimized and set aside. And he had let them do it, not because he was powerless, because he was patient. The patience of someone who knew exactly when the clock was going to run out. She thought about him sitting on that cot in Bay 3, calling his daughter every night at 7:30, tracking every dollar in a spiral notebook, waiting, with that specific, unbearable steadiness. For a moment he couldn't control but could see coming. She got out of the car. In the elevator up to her room, she pulled out her phone and called an attorney she trusted, a woman named Sandra Coe, who had built a career on exactly this kind of case, the kind where the fraud was real, but the evidence was dispersed, and the people responsible were connected enough to make it difficult. "Sandra," she said when the call connected, "I have something for you. It's complicated." "My favorite kind," Sandra said. "You might change your mind when I explain it." "I doubt it. What are we looking at?" Victoria walked into her hotel room and dropped her portfolio on the bed and started pacing, which was what she did when she was thinking fast. "Coordinated custody fraud," she said. "Financial motive. Connected actors with access to the county evaluation system. And a timeline that needs to be built carefully because the central figure can't legally confirm the most important part of it yet." A pause on Sandra's end. "Yet. There's a window. I don't know exactly how wide it is, but it's coming." "And when the window opens?" "Everything changes," Victoria said. "Quickly." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Send me what you have. Tonight." "And the central figure. Do I need to talk to him?" Victoria thought about Nathan Cole in the back office of the garage, hands wrapped around a bad cup of coffee, talking about a dentist appointment he hadn't been allowed to attend. "Not yet," she said. "But soon." She hung up and opened her laptop and started drafting the email to Sandra, and outside the hotel window the December sky over Annapolis was the color of slate and the temperature was dropping, and somewhere across the county, a man was sleeping on a cot in a garage, counting down to something that nobody else could see yet. She worked until 1 in the morning. She filled 4 pages in the notepad. She slept 3 hours and woke up thinking about the shape of things that were about to change. When she got to her desk at 8, there was a text on her phone from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it. She was glad she did. It said, "The evaluation was moved up because a motion was filed requesting expedited review. I looked it up last night. The motion was filed by Claire's attorney 6 weeks before the date it was moved to. Gerald Fitch never told me about the motion. N." She read it twice. Then she typed back, "Did Gerald Fitch know Marcus Hale?" 3 minutes passed. Then, "They were in the same fraternity at University of Maryland. I just found that too. I'm sorry, I know this changes things." She stared at that last sentence for a moment. Then she typed, "Don't apologize. This is exactly what I needed. Don't contact Fitch. Don't contact anyone about this. Can you meet me Monday?" The response came back in under a minute. "I'll be at the shop." She set the phone down and looked at the wall of her hotel room where she'd taped up a timeline she was building. Dates and names and connections mapped out in blue marker on 3 sheets of paper she'd taped together. She picked up the marker. She added Gerald Fitch to the map. She drew a line from his name to Marcus Hale. She drew another line from Marcus Hale to Halcyon Advisory Group. She drew another line from Halcyon to Meridian Capital. She drew another line from Meridian to Centurion Energy. And then she stood back and looked at the shape of it, the whole connected web of it, and felt the particular cold clarity that came when a problem resolved from blur into focus. It wasn't complete yet. There were gaps. There were things she couldn't prove yet, and things she might never be able to prove. But the shape was unmistakable now, and the shape said, this was deliberate. This was planned. This was a group of people who had identified a target and had systematically dismantled his visible life while the real value, the thing they couldn't touch, ticked quietly toward a detonation they thought they had time to manage. They were wrong about that. Victoria Sterling capped the marker and looked at the timeline. She was not, by nature, a person who got angry. She processed information and she solved problems and she moved forward, and anger was generally not useful in that sequence. But standing in a hotel room in Annapolis on a Sunday morning in December, looking at what someone had done to a man and his 8-year-old daughter, she felt something that was close enough to anger that the distinction barely mattered. She thought about Lily asking her father why she couldn't come to the garage more. She thought about Nathan saying, "Things that need to stay broken for a little while longer before I can fix them." She looked at the timeline. "Not much longer," she said to no one in particular. Then she picked up her phone and called Sandra Coe again, because there was work to do, and she had never in her life been the kind of person who waited for permission to start. Sandra Coe drove a 10-year-old Volvo with a cracked dashboard and a back seat permanently occupied by case files, and she arrived at Delmarva Auto on a Monday morning in the second week of January, looking like someone who had slept badly on purpose. Like sleep deprivation was a professional choice she'd made and was committed to. She was 47, Korean-American, with short hair going gray at the temples and reading glasses she kept losing and finding in increasingly improbable locations. She had spent 21 years doing family law with a subspecialty in custody fraud that had made her modestly well-known in legal circles and deeply unpopular with a specific category of opposing counsel. Nathan met her in the parking lot. He'd known she was coming. Victoria had texted him Sunday evening with a time and a brief description. Attorney, specialty in custody cases, she's good, trust her. But seeing her in person, small and slightly rumpled next to her cluttered Volvo, was not quite what he'd pictured. She looked at him with the direct, efficient appraisal of someone who spent her professional life reading people quickly and accurately. "Nathan Cole," she said. Not a question. "That's me." Sandra Coe. She shook his hand. Her grip was firm in the slightly aggressive way of people who'd spent years making sure nobody underestimated them in the first few seconds. "Victoria's told me the outline. I need the details. Do you have somewhere we can talk that isn't a parking lot?" They went to the back office. Darnell, who had been watching from the door of Bay 1 with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that something significant was happening and had decided to stay out of it, caught Nathan's eye as they passed and raised his eyebrows in a question that Nathan answered with a slight shake of his head that meant later. Sandra sat down across from Nathan and opened a legal pad. She didn't open a laptop. She wrote everything longhand in a cramped, fast script that was apparently legible only to her. "Okay," she said. "Start from when the divorce proceedings began. Don't summarize. I need the sequence and I need it in order." Nathan started talking. He told the story before to Gerald Fitch, to the court, to Dr. Ingalls in pieces. But he'd never told it the way Sandra wanted it, which was all of it, without the edits people typically make when they're telling a story they think will be judged. She stopped him repeatedly with questions that were precise and occasionally uncomfortable. When the evaluation was moved up, who told you? Gerald Fitch, by email. Did the email give a reason? He said it was a scheduling adjustment. Did he mention a motion had been filed? No. When did you find out a motion had been filed? 2 weeks ago. I pulled the court records myself online. Sandra wrote something. And Fitch never mentioned it. No. At any point. No. She wrote more. Tell me about Marcus Hale's presence at the settlement meeting. Nathan told her. She listened without expression, writing. Did your attorney object to his presence? He raised it. The other attorney said Hale was there as moral support for Claire and had no legal role. And Fitch accepted that? He accepted that. Sandra looked up from the legal pad. Mr. Cole, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me the same way, because anything less is going to make my job harder. Do you believe Gerald Fitch was working against your interests deliberately, or do you believe he was simply incompetent? The question sat in the room for a moment. Nathan had thought about this. He'd thought about it on the cot in Bay 3 at 2 a.m. more than once, turning it over and examining it the way he examined mechanical problems, looking for the simplest explanation that accounted for all the facts. Both, he said. I think he was selected because he was the kind of attorney who could be managed. Not bought necessarily, just pointed in a direction and trusted not to look too hard at what was beside the road. Sandra studied him. That's a careful answer. It's the most accurate one I have. She wrote it down. Then she set her pen down on the legal pad and said, without particular drama, I've looked at what Victoria sent me. I've looked at the timeline she built. I want to tell you what I think it means, and then I want you to tell me what I'm wrong about. Okay? I think Marcus Hale became aware, through whatever channel, that you had a significant financial interest that was going to become public within a certain window. I think he and Claire structured the divorce to occur before that window opened, with the specific goal of ensuring that the settlement was finalized before your financial position changed. I think the expedited custody evaluation served two purposes. It accelerated the overall legal timeline, and it established a custody arrangement that would be harder to challenge once your circumstances changed, because courts are reluctant to revisit settled arrangements without compelling new evidence. She paused. I think Gerald Fitch was either paid to underperform or was selected because his prior relationship with Hale made him a safe choice. I think the evaluator program was a vehicle that provided Hale with at least indirect influence over who evaluated the case. And I think the person who understood all of this and had the discipline to say nothing, to sign everything and wait, was you. Nathan was very still. How close am I? Sandra said. Close enough, he said. What am I missing? He looked at the table for a moment. The specific financial interest, he said. I can't tell you what it is, not legally, not yet. Approximately how long until you can? He'd been doing the math on this for weeks. The acquisition, which he couldn't name, which he couldn't confirm, which he knew from the structured communications that passed through channels his confidentiality agreement permitted, was moving faster than the original projections. Elliot Marsh had sent him a message through their agreed protocol in the second week of December. 2 words, which was the maximum their system allowed for non-emergency contact. On track, which meant the announcement could come as early as March, possibly February if the regulatory process moved quickly, which in his experience it usually didn't, but occasionally did. Weeks, he said, maybe 2 months. Sandra picked up her pen again. Then we need to build everything we can before that so we're ready to move the moment the window opens. Because the moment it opens, opposing counsel is going to move fast to reframe the narrative, to argue that any change in your financial status is recent and therefore irrelevant to the original settlement. Can they do that? They can try, Sandra said. My job is to make sure that when we walk into a hearing, The court has already seen enough to understand that the settlement was constructed under false pretenses from the beginning. She looked at him levelly. This is doable, Mr. Cole. It requires evidence I don't have yet, and some of it may be difficult to obtain. But the structure of what was done here is, frankly, not that sophisticated. It relied on you not knowing what to look for, or not being able to act on what I found. Yes, that too. She paused. Do you know who Hale used to access the evaluator program? No specific names, but the procurement trail. Victoria showed me. It's suggestive, but not conclusive. I need a direct link. She tapped the legal pad with one finger. I'm going to subpoena Halcyon Advisory Group's communications in a parallel civil proceeding I'll file this week. It's a long shot. Their attorneys will fight it. But the filing itself creates a record, and sometimes people panic when subpoenas land. What kind of people? The kind who've gotten used to operating in spaces where nobody asks direct questions. Nathan thought about Marcus Hale in the beige conference room, ankle crossed over his knee, murmuring to Claire's attorney. The specific ease of a man who had never once been made to feel accountable. He'll get good attorneys, Nathan said. He already has them, Sandra said. But good attorneys can't make evidence disappear once it's been requested through proper channels. They can delay. They can object. They can make it expensive and slow. She looked at him. This will probably get worse before it gets better. I want you to know that. I know that. It may get worse for Lily, too. If Hale feels threatened, the people around him may become less cooperative about the custody arrangement. Something moved through Nathan's face. Sandra watched it pass. I understand, he said. Are you sure? I've been understanding that possibility for 3 months, he said. It doesn't change what I'm doing. Sandra looked at him for a moment in the particular way of someone who has spent years watching people say things they don't mean and has learned to identify the difference. All right, she said. She picked up the legal pad. I'm going to need access to every piece of correspondence you have from Gerald Fitch. Emails, texts, anything written. Do you have those? Yes. I'm going to need you to write out a detailed timeline, your own recollection, not the court documents, of every significant moment in the divorce and custody process. Every meeting, every phone call, anything that felt wrong, even if you couldn't explain why. Can you do that? Yes. Good. She stood. I'll be in touch by the end of the week. She left the way she'd arrived, direct, slightly windswept, not waiting to be seen out. Nathan listened to the sound of her Volvo starting up in the parking lot and sat in the back office for a minute with his hands flat on the desk. Then he got up and went to find Darnell. Darnell was in Bay 2, doing something to a brake assembly. He looked up when Nathan came in but didn't stop working. Well, he said. I think things are about to get complicated, Nathan said. Things have been complicated. More complicated than this. Darnell was quiet for a moment, attention on the brake assembly. You going to tell me what's actually going on? At some point? Nathan leaned against the doorframe. At some point, he said. Not yet. How long has this been going on? The real thing, not the divorce part. Nathan thought about it. About 8 years. Darnell stopped working, looked at him. 8 years. It's not what you think. I have no idea what to think. I know. I'm sorry. Darnell set down his tool and turned fully to face him. Are you in trouble? Legal trouble? No. Financial trouble? Nathan paused. The opposite of financial trouble. Darnell stared at him. The fluorescent light in Bay 2 was steadier than the one in Bay 3. It didn't flicker. And it lit Darnell's expression clearly, which was a complicated one. Confusion and concern, and the specific frustration of a loyal person who knows they're being kept in the dark for reasons that are probably good, but doesn't find that entirely comforting. You're going to explain all of this to me eventually, Darnell said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Nathan said, I promise. Okay. Darnell picked up his tool again. In the meantime, there's a Toyota in Bay 4 that needs a full diagnostic, and Pete keeps saying it's beyond his skill level, which is almost certainly not true, but I need someone to deal with it. I'll do it. Good. Nathan pushed off the doorframe and went to Bay 4 because there was work to do, and work was the thing he understood best right now, the thing that had a logic to it, a clear sequence of cause and effect, a problem you could find and isolate and fix with the right tools and enough patience. He wished more of his life worked that way. Victoria had been right about one thing. It got worse before it got better. Midway through January, Claire's attorney sent a letter to Sandra indicating that given Nathan's unstable living situation and inconsistent employment history, Claire was seeking a modification to reduce Nathan's already limited visitation to supervised only. The letter cited Dr. Ingles's evaluation and several additional points that Nathan read twice, very carefully, while sitting in the back office with the space heater working at maximum and his jaw set in a way that made Darnell, who happened to walk through, stop and say nothing, and walk back out again. The points were specific and targeted and, taken in isolation and without context, not entirely unreasonable. That was the thing. That was what made Nathan's hands tighten on the paper. The letter was designed to be read by someone who didn't know the context, who looked at Nathan Cole on paper and saw a man with no fixed address, minimal income, and a living arrangement that consisted of a cot in a commercial garage. And it was designed to make the request seem proportionate to those visible facts. He called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. "I saw it," she said. "Sandra forwarded it to me. They're moving faster than I expected." "They're scared," she said. "The subpoena filing rattled something. We expected this." "We expected it in the abstract," Nathan said. "It's different in the concrete." A pause. "I know. If they get supervised visitation, they won't," she said. "Sandra's filing a response today, and I have something." She paused in a way that meant the something was significant. "My forensic accountant found a thread in the Halcyon financial filings. A payment, structured to look like a consulting fee, made 14 months ago to a company that turns out to be a shell connected to Gerald Fitch's law firm." Nathan was very still. "How much?" $38,000. He closed his eyes briefly. "The SUV." "What?" "The SUV, at the settlement. Gerald told me not to fight for it. $38,000. Silence on the line. "Nathan, he was paid the value of the asset I gave up," Nathan said. The words came out flat and level, the way he handled most things that hit him hard, with a specific forced steadiness that cost more than it looked like it cost. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Victoria said. "It's not." Another pause. "Are you okay?" The question landed differently than he expected. Not clinical, the way Sandra asked it. Not the rote concern of a colleague checking a box. She asked it like she actually wanted to know. "I'm functional," he said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at the wall where Lily's horse drawings were taped. She'd added 2 new ones on her last weekend visit. The proportions, as he'd told Victoria, were improving. The horses were beginning to look more like horses and less like enthusiastic interpretations of the concept of horse. "I'm angry," he said. "I'm trying not to spend energy on that because it's not useful right now, but yes, I'm angry." "Good," she said, which surprised him. "Anger's honest. Just don't let it make you move before you're ready." "I'm not going to." "I know. She stopped herself. "I know." He noted the stop, filed it away. "What's the next step?" he said. "Sandra takes the payment evidence to the Bar Association and files a formal complaint against Fitch simultaneously with the response to the visitation modification. It creates a record. It also means Fitch can no longer represent Claire in these proceedings, because the moment the complaint is filed, he becomes a subject of investigation and the conflict of interest is undeniable. Claire will get new counsel. Yes. And new counsel will need time to get up to speed, which buys us time. How much time do we need?" Her answer came after a slight pause. "How much time do you have?" He thought about the 2-word message from Elliot Marsh. On track. "The timeline is compressing. I think we might be looking at February rather than March. That's 6 weeks, give or take. Then we need to make those 6 weeks count." He heard her moving, pacing, probably. He'd learned she paced when she was thinking fast. "I need you to do something that's going to be difficult." "What?" "I need you to let me look at your financial history. All of it. Not the disclosures from the settlement. The real history. Bank records. Any accounts you have. Any transactions over the past 3 years. I need to show that you've been systematically maintaining your position as a provider. that you've been putting money aside for Lily specifically, that your financial choices during this period reflect the priorities of a devoted father and not a man who abandoned his responsibilities. He understood what she was really saying. She needed to build the picture of him that the court should have seen from the beginning but hadn't, because Gerald Fitch had been paid not to build it. "I'll pull everything together," he said. "This week if you can." "I'll have it by Thursday." Another brief pause. "How are you sleeping?" The question came in at a slight angle, like she'd almost not asked it. 4 or 5 hours, he said. Same. He wasn't sure why that made him feel slightly less alone in the specific way that it did, but it did. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she confirmed, and hung up. The bar complaint against Gerald Fitch was filed on a Wednesday. By Friday, Fitch had retained his own attorney, and Claire had been notified that her legal representation was compromised. The replacement attorney, a woman named Patricia Dell, who Sandra told Nathan was competent and thorough and would not make Fitch's particular kind of mistakes, filed for a 2-week continuance on the visitation modification to review the case. The 2-week continuance was granted. It was a small thing. But small things, Nathan had learned, mattered enormously when you were counting time. He spent that weekend with Lily. She arrived Friday evening in her winter coat, carrying a backpack with what she described as essential supplies, which turned out to include 3 horse books, a box of colored pencils, and a bag of the specific brand of pretzels she'd decided was acceptable and no other brand would do. She stood in Bay 3 and looked around in the considering way she had, that gray-green gaze moving over the space slowly. And Nathan watched her face, reading it the way he'd read her face since she was born, looking for what she was actually thinking underneath what she was saying. "I brought stuff to make it better," she announced. "Better than what?" "Better than it looks." She unzipped the backpack and produced, with the gravity of a surgeon presenting instruments, a string of small battery-powered lights, the kind people put on small trees. "Renata gave them to me. She said they'd make it feel less like a garage." "It is a garage." "It can be a garage that also feels nice," Lily said, in the patient tone she used when she felt he was missing an obvious point. They spent 40 minutes stringing the lights along the top of the wall in Bay 3. It was not a smooth process. The battery pack didn't work until Nathan found a loose wire and fixed it, and Lily decided partway through that the lights should be hung unevenly because that was more interesting. And Nathan disagreed and they negotiated, and the final result was something in between that Lily declared actually better than either of our ideas, which Nathan was privately forced to agree with. When they turned them on, little warm points of light running along the top of the cold garage wall, Lily stood back and looked at them for a long moment. "See?" she said. "Yeah," Nathan said. "I see." She looked at him. "It's going to be okay, Dad. You keep telling me that because you keep needing to hear it." She said it without cruelty, just as a fact. The particular directness of a child who hadn't yet learned to soften everything. "Are you working on the problem?" "Yes." "Is it getting better?" He thought about the bar complaint, the forensic accountant's finding, Victoria's timeline on the hotel wall, Sandra's subpoena filing, the slow, painstaking construction of a case that would hold weight in a courtroom, built piece by piece while he waited for a clock he couldn't control to reach the moment that changed everything. "Yes," he said, slowly. She nodded, as if this were satisfactory. Then she pulled out the colored pencils and sat on the edge of the cot and opened to a blank page in one of the horse books. She drew in the margins, a habit Nathan had long since accepted, and started drawing. He sat across from her and opened a book he wasn't really reading and watched her draw, and the battery-powered lights made the cold garage look like something warmer than it was, and he held that for as long as he could. The thing nobody tells you about waiting, the specific kind of waiting Nathan was doing, the kind with a known endpoint that you couldn't quite see, is that it changes shape over time. In the beginning, it was acute. Every day a fresh experience of the same raw awareness that something was wrong and he couldn't fix it yet. After the first month, it had flattened into a kind of persistent background noise, always present, sometimes louder and sometimes quieter, but never gone. By February, it had changed again, into something that felt more like pressure. The specific pressure of knowing the end was close enough to almost touch, but not quite. and that the days remaining needed to be handled exactly right. Sandra called him on a Monday morning in the first week of February. "We have a problem," she said. His stomach tightened. "What kind?" "The hearing on the visitation modification has been moved up. Patricia Dell filed a motion citing your living situation as an ongoing concern requiring expedited review. It's been scheduled for the 28th. 3 weeks. "That's too soon," he said. "I know." "The acquisition—" "I know," Sandra said. "I'm working on it. But I need you to tell me honestly, is there any possibility the announcement comes before the 28th? He pulled out the phone he kept separate from his regular one, the one that received the structured communications from Elliot's end of the protocol. He'd checked it that morning. Nothing new since the January message. "I don't know," he said. "It was supposed to be late February at the earliest." "Then we go to court on the 28th without it," Sandra said. "We go with what we have." "What do we have?" She was quiet for a moment. "We have the Fitch payment evidence, which I've submitted to the court as part of a fraud claim. We have the procurement irregularities Victoria documented. We have your financial records showing consistent, intentional support of Lily's needs. We have 12 character witnesses I've compiled, including Lily's teacher and school counselor, both of whom have agreed to submit written statements." She paused. "And we have the evaluation timing irregularities, which I've submitted a formal challenge on. The challenge may or may not get traction before the 28th. What are our chances?" A pause. "Honest answer? Always. On the 28th, without the acquisition news, we make progress. Maybe significant progress. But we're probably not reversing the custody arrangement in a single hearing. The best realistic outcome is that the judge denies the modification and orders further investigation into the fraud allegations. And Lily still comes every other weekend. Yes. And we keep building toward a full reversal." Nathan stood in Bay 3 with the phone pressed to his ear and the battery-powered lights running along the top of the wall, and he looked at the framed drawing, stick figures, himself and Lily, and did the math he'd been avoiding doing. "Okay," he said. "We go on the 28th. Nathan, I want to say something." "Say it. What you've done, how you've handled this, most people would have broken, would have violated the confidentiality agreement, or made public statements, or done something that felt like fighting even if it made the legal situation worse. You didn't. Whatever happens on the 28th, that patience has given us the foundation to fight this properly." He didn't say anything for a moment. "It wasn't patience," he said finally. "It was just not having a choice." "Most people find a way to make a bad choice when they feel like they don't have any good ones," Sandra said. "You didn't. That matters." After he hung up, he stood in the garage for a while doing nothing in particular. Pete appeared in the doorway of Bay 3, an unusual occurrence since Pete rarely came into Bay 3, and leaned against the frame. "Carlos says the Subaru in Bay 2 is worse than it looks," Pete said. "Carlos says that about everything." "He's usually right." "Yeah." Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. "I'll look at it." Pete didn't leave. He stood there for another moment, looking at the battery-powered lights along the wall, which were still on because Lily had left them on, and Nathan had not turned them off. "My sister's kids," Pete said. "When the custody thing happened. Her ex kept moving hearings, kept changing things." He paused. "She thought it would never be over." "Is it over now?" "Yeah, it took 2 years, but yeah." Nathan looked at the lights. 2 years. "It's not always 2 years," Pete said quickly, apparently realizing this was not the most comforting data point. "Hers was complicated. Mine is also complicated." "Yeah, but she's okay now." Another pause. "And her ex has to pay her $900 a month, which she says is satisfying." Nathan almost laughed. "How many words is that, Pete?" Pete thought about it. "A lot." 63, Nathan said. "New record." Pete considered this. "Huh," he said, and went back to his bay. Victoria came to the shop 2 days before the hearing. She didn't call ahead. He was starting to expect that from her. And she arrived in the early evening when the other mechanics had left, and only Darnell was still there, finishing paperwork in the front office. She had the leather portfolio, and she had Sandra's case summary, and she had under her eyes the specific shadows of someone who had not been sleeping adequately for an extended period, which Nathan recognized because he saw the same thing in every mirror. "I have something," she said without preamble, walking into Bay 3 where Nathan was reorganizing his toolbox, which was a thing he did when he was anxious. "And I need to tell you carefully, because part of it you already know, and part of it you're going to want to react to, and I need you to not react until I'm done." He set down the wrench in his hand. "Okay." She opened the portfolio. "My forensic accountant went deeper on the Halcyon communications, the ones we got through the subpoena response, before their attorneys shut it down." She put a document on the work table. "There's a series of emails between Hale and a man named Robert Cullen, who turns out to be a senior partner at the firm that manages the venture capital fund, Meridian Capital, that holds a position in Centurion Energy." Nathan looked at the document. His face was very still. The emails discuss a timeline management strategy regarding a specific unnamed individual with an equity stake in a portfolio company. They're careful. They don't name the company. They don't name the individual. But the dates are unambiguous. The emails begin 8 months before your divorce was filed. 8 months. He had met Claire for dinner 8 months before she'd filed. She'd told him she wanted to try counseling. He'd said yes. They'd seen a therapist 3 times before Claire had said she didn't think it was working. He thought about that dinner now in a way he hadn't before, and something moved through him that was not quite grief and not quite anger and not quite anything he had clean language for. The strategy, Victoria continued, as described in the emails, was to, and I'm paraphrasing because the precise language is more circumspect, ensure that the individual's legal and financial position was simplified before an upcoming liquidity event. Simplified. She looked at him. "That's the word they used." "Simplified," Nathan said. "Yes." He was quiet. "There are 3 emails," she said. "The last one is dated 6 weeks before your divorce filing. It says, and this I'm reading directly, that the domestic situation is proceeding on the agreed timeline and that arrangements are in place for the evaluation process." The room was very quiet. "The evaluation process," Nathan said. "Yes." He sat down on the edge of the workbench, not because he needed to, because standing suddenly seemed like it required more active maintenance than he had available. He had known, had suspected, had been almost certain, but knowing and having it in black ink in someone else's words were different things in a way he hadn't fully accounted for. "They planned the whole thing," he said, "before she filed, before any of it." "Yes," Victoria said. "I believe so." He looked at the document without really seeing it. He was thinking about the 8 years he'd spent stepping back from Centurion, choosing Lily, choosing the quiet life of a present father over the louder life of a co-founder watching his company grow. He'd made that choice willingly. He'd never regretted it, not once. But someone had watched him make it and had calculated coldly what it made him vulnerable to. "Hale found out about Centurion," Nathan said slowly, "through Meridian Capital, his shell company. They had a stake in the fund that had a stake in the company, and when the acquisition talks started, when the value became real, he figured out I was going to be rich. And decided to move before you were," Victoria said, "and convinced Claire—" He stopped. "I don't know how much Claire knew," Victoria said carefully, "about the corporate piece. She may have known all of it. She may have been told a version that was—" "It doesn't matter," Nathan said. "It might matter legally." "It matters legally. It doesn't—" He stopped again, started over. "She's Lily's mother. Whatever she knew, she's Lily's mother. That has to stay separate." Victoria looked at him for a moment. "Can it?" "It has to," he said. "I need it to." She nodded slowly and didn't push. "Sandra can use these emails," she said, "at the hearing. They're not conclusive. Opposing counsel will argue they're ambiguous. But combined with the Fitch payment evidence and the evaluation timeline, they build a picture that a judge would have to be deliberately obtuse to ignore." "Do we have a judge yet?" "Judge Ellen Park. Sandra knows her. She's thorough. She doesn't take shortcuts and she doesn't let the attorneys in her courtroom take them either." Nathan absorbed that. "Okay. There's one more thing," Victoria said. Something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. "What?" She put a second document on the work table. It was a printout from a financial industry newsletter, the kind that circulated in clean tech and energy investment circles, specialist publications that didn't reach general audiences. Nathan recognized the format. He'd been watching several of them from a distance for months. The headline read, Centurion Energy Acquisition Talks Confirmed. Sources say deal could close within weeks. The article was dated that morning. Nathan read it twice. Then he set it down. It's out, he said. It's early, Victoria said. It's a trade publication, not mainstream news, but it will spread. These things always spread fast once the first confirmation is out. She paused. The hearing is in 2 days. He understood what she was saying. The timing, which had been the whole problem, the entire architecture of what had been done to him, was shifting. The thing that Marcus Hale had spent 2 years maneuvering to prevent was about to become public knowledge, whether the hearing waited for it or not. Sandra needs to know, he said. I called her before I came here, Victoria said. She's already working on it. He looked at her. In the evening light of Bay 3, with the battery-powered lights making small, warm points along the wall and the smell of motor oil and winter cold mixing in the air, she looked like someone who had been running hard for a long time and was not slowing down. You called her before you came to tell me, he said. I needed Sandra to start moving before I drove out here. That's very efficient. Something shifted in her expression, not quite an apology, more like an acknowledgement. I know. I'm working on that. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the article, and at the emails, and at the little warm lights along the wall. 2 days? He said. 2 days, she said. Outside, the February wind moved through the gap under the bay doors. The fluorescent light in Bay 3 flickered. 4 seconds, steady, 4 seconds. The same rhythm it had kept since November, patient and indifferent and completely unaware that everything was about to change. Nathan did not sleep the night before the hearing. He tried, around 11, lying on the cot in Bay 3, with the battery-powered lights still running because turning them off felt like closing something he wanted to keep open. He lay there for about 40 minutes, listening to the wind outside and the particular silence of the empty shop and the distant sound of traffic on the highway 2 blocks over. And then he sat up and accepted that sleep was not going to happen and got up and made coffee on the hot plate and sat at the work table with a legal pad and went through everything Sandra had given him one more time. Not because he didn't know it, he knew it. He'd read it so many times the pages had soft edges from handling. He read it because the act of reading it was something to do with his hands and his eyes, while his mind worked through the same sequence it had been working through for days. The hearing, the judge, the emails, the Fitch evidence, the trade publication article about Centurion that had, as Victoria predicted, moved through financial media with increasing speed over the past 48 hours. By Wednesday morning, it had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. By Wednesday evening, 3 more. The language was still careful. Sources confirm, deal expected to close, terms not yet disclosed. But the name Centurion Energy was now in headlines that reached audiences beyond the specialist newsletters. And with the name came the first mentions of the company's founders. Elliot Marsh had called him Wednesday afternoon through the approved channel. An actual call, which was unusual and indicated the situation had moved beyond what their 2-word protocol was designed to handle. The announcement is being moved up, Elliot had said. His voice had the specific tautness of a man managing several things at once. Legal is saying we're looking at Friday at the earliest, Monday at the outside. The leaks accelerated the timeline. I have a hearing Thursday morning, Nathan said. A pause. I know. I saw your name in the filings. Nathan, if there's anything I can... There's nothing, Nathan said. You do what you need to do on your end. I'll handle mine. Your confidentiality obligations are still in effect until the announcement is public. I know. After the announcement, everything is released. You can say whatever you need to say. I know, Elliot. Another pause and then, more quietly, I should have pushed back harder when they started removing your name from the filings. I knew something felt wrong about it. I should have... Don't, Nathan said. We made the agreements we made. We couldn't have predicted everything. No, Elliot said, but still. Nathan had let that sit for a moment. Make sure the announcement is clean, he said. Make sure my name is in it, clearly and completely. That matters. It will be, Elliot said. You have my word. Now it was 2 in the morning, and Nathan sat with his coffee and his legal pad and thought about the morning. He thought about Judge Ellen Park, whom Sandra had described as thorough and impatient with shortcuts. He thought about the emails, the ones Victoria's forensic accountant had pulled from the Halcyon subpoena, the ones with the phrase domestic situation proceeding on the agreed timeline. And he thought about what it would mean for those words to be read aloud in a courtroom. He thought about Lily, who was sleeping 10 miles away in the house that had been Nathan's house too, in the room with the light on, probably with a horse book open on the pillow beside her the way she always fell asleep. He did not think about Marcus Hale. He had made a conscious decision, sometime in January, to stop spending mental energy on Marcus Hale until he was in a position to spend it usefully. The decision required maintenance, like most conscious decisions about where to direct your attention, but it had mostly held. He did think about Claire. He always thought about Claire in the late-night hours, more than he wanted to, and it was never simple the way anger would have been simple. They had been together for 7 years. They had a daughter together. Whatever she had known, whatever she had been told, whatever she had allowed herself to believe, he didn't think she was a fundamentally bad person. He thought she was a person who had made choices that had hurt his daughter, and that was the part he couldn't set aside, no matter how hard he tried to be fair about the rest. He drank his coffee. He read Sandra's case summary one more time. He did not sleep. At 5:30, he got up, showered in the cold back bathroom, put on the suit he'd bought secondhand from a consignment shop in Annapolis 3 weeks ago, dark gray, good fabric, slightly too large in the shoulders, and stood in Bay 3 in the early dark and looked at the battery-powered lights along the wall. Lily had put them there to make it feel less like a garage. He left them on when he went out. Sandra was already in the courthouse when he arrived, which did not surprise him. She was the kind of attorney who arrived places first, not as a power move, but because she genuinely could not function if she didn't have 20 minutes to orient herself in a space before anything important happened in it. She had a coffee from the courthouse vending machine that she was not drinking, and a stack of files that she was sorting through with the focused energy of someone who had also not slept. She looked up when Nathan came in. Took him in. The suit, the shadows under his eyes, the stillness he'd perfected over 3 months of having very little to do with his anxiety except carry it quietly. "How are you?" she said. "Ready," he said. "That's not what I asked." "It's the answer I have." She looked at him for another moment, then handed him a coffee from the vending machine that she'd apparently gotten for him. It was terrible coffee, the kind that tasted like the machine's opinion of coffee rather than actual coffee, but it was hot. He took it. "Patricia Dell filed a response to our fraud evidence late yesterday," Sandra said. "She's arguing the Halcyon emails are taken out of context and that the Fitch payment was a legitimate consulting arrangement. She's going to push hard on the living situation and the income instability." "I expected that." "She's good. Don't underestimate her. She's not Fitch. She's not going to miss things." "What's our opening?" "I'm leading with the evaluation irregularities because those are the most procedurally clean. Then the Fitch payment. Then the Halcyon emails. I want to build the picture incrementally. I want Judge Park to have the fraud framework in her mind before I put the most damaging documents in front of her." "And the Centurion news?" Sandra's expression was carefully neutral. "As of right now, the confidentiality agreement is still in effect, and you haven't confirmed anything to me about your specific connection to that company. What I know is what's in the trade press, which is public information that anyone can read." "But you know." "I know what the public record suggests," she said. "I know that the timeline of events in your case aligns precisely with the timeline of events in that company's development. I know that the people who appear to have orchestrated your legal situation have financial connections to that company's investor network." She looked at him levelly. "I have not asked you to confirm or deny anything, and I am not going to. What I'm going to do is put all of that in front of Judge Park and let her draw her own conclusions." Nathan looked at his terrible coffee. "And if the announcement comes today?" "Then everything changes in the middle of the hearing," Sandra said, "and I will adapt." He nodded. Victoria arrived at 8:15. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, charcoal, well cut, and she had the leather portfolio under her arm, and her expression was the same one she'd had the night she'd brought him the Halcyon emails, concentrated, pointed, moving forward. She sat down beside him on the bench outside the courtroom and didn't say anything for a moment. Just sat. He registered the presence of another person who was as invested in the next few hours as he was, and found it unexpectedly steadying. "Drew is monitoring the financial wires," she said finally. "If anything breaks before noon, I'll know within minutes." "Thank you." She looked at him. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." "Me neither." She paused. "I kept thinking about the emails, the phrase they used." "Simplified," he said. "Yes." She shook her head slowly, something hard moving through her expression. "The audacity of it." "The arrogance," he said. "They assumed I wouldn't have anyone in my corner who could find it. They didn't count on the oversight committee reviewing your file. They didn't count on you reviewing it," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment. There was something in that look that he didn't quite know what to do with. Not unpracticed. Nathan was not an unpracticed reader of people, but something he'd been deliberately not examining too directly for the past several weeks, because the last 2 months had not been a good time for adding complexity to an already complicated situation. "You ready?" she said. "Sandra asked me the same thing." And it's the answer I have," he said. She almost smiled. "Okay." The courtroom was smaller than Nathan had expected. Not a large formal chamber, but a mid-sized family courtroom, wood-paneled, fluorescent lit, with the specific institutional smell of a building where difficult things happened daily and the carpet had absorbed years of it. There were 4 rows of gallery seats, mostly empty. Patricia Dell was already at her table reviewing documents with a young associate who handed her things with the silent efficiency of a well-trained runner. Claire was there. She was sitting beside Patricia Dell, and Nathan saw her before she saw him, which gave him a moment he hadn't anticipated. A clear, unprepared view of her face, which was tighter than he remembered it being, carrying something that read, from across the room, less like the satisfaction he'd expected, and more like something else. Strain, maybe. The specific tension of a person who knows that the ground they're standing on is less solid than they'd been told. Marcus Hale was not present. Nathan had expected that. Hale was smart enough not to be in the room when the Halcyon emails came into evidence. Claire saw Nathan when he came to the plaintiff's table. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She looked away first. Judge Ellen Park entered at 9:02, which Sandra had told him was characteristic. She gave proceedings precisely 2 minutes of grace and not 1 second more. She was 60, with close-cropped white hair and the expression of a person who had spent decades in this specific chair and had evolved past the point of being surprised by human behavior, but maintained, despite that, a level of attention to the people in front of her that was not perfunctory. She looked at both tables. "We're here on a motion to modify custody visitation to supervised status, filed by the respondent. We also have a fraud claim filed by the petitioner. I've reviewed both submissions." She looked at Sandra. "Ms. Coe, you're going to tell me something I don't see in the written submissions, or we're going to have a short morning." "Yes, Your Honor," Sandra said, rising. "There is considerably more that the written submissions don't fully capture." "Then capture it," Judge Park said. Sandra captured it. She was good. Nathan had known she was good from the first meeting in the back office, but watching her in a courtroom was a different experience. She had the particular quality of someone who understood that a judge's time was the scarcest resource in the room, and she did not waste a second of it. She moved through the evaluation irregularities first, precisely as she'd outlined, laying out the procurement timeline and the Hale campaign contribution and the statistical impossibility of the boilerplate language appearing verbatim in 14 evaluations without systematic cause. Judge Park asked 2 questions, both sharp. Sandra answered both completely. Then the Fitch payment. Patricia Dell objected twice during this section. Judge Park sustained the first objection on a technicality, overruled the second with a look that made Dell's associate stop writing for a moment. Then Sandra put the Halcyon emails on the courtroom display. The room got very quiet. Sandra read the relevant sections aloud. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. The language, domestic situation proceeding on the agreed timeline, arrangements in place for the evaluation process, did its own work in the silence of the room. Judge Park read the emails on her screen. She read them twice. Nathan watched her face and saw nothing he could interpret clearly, which he suspected was entirely intentional. Patricia Dell rose for her response with the composed efficiency of someone who had prepared for this and knew the emails were coming. "Your Honor, these communications are vague at best and fabricated at worst. The phrase domestic situation could refer to any number of Ms. Dell, Judge Park said, I've been doing this for 31 years. I know what a vague communication looks like, and I know what a deliberately obfuscatory communication looks like. She looked at the screen again. Continue. Dell pressed on, competently, arguing context and ambiguity and the inadmissibility of improperly obtained evidence. The argument was well constructed, and Nathan could see Judge Park giving it genuine consideration, which was both reassuring, she wasn't ignoring it, and nerve-wracking for exactly the same reason. They broke for 15 minutes at 10:30. Nathan sat in the hallway with Sandra and Victoria. Victoria was on her phone, checking something. Her expression was focused and gave nothing away. How is it going? Nathan asked Sandra. Better than expected, she said. Park is paying attention. That's the thing you want most from a judge, genuine attention. She's not going to let Dell's context argument carry the day, but she's going to want more than what we've given her before she acts decisively. What more can we give her? Sandra was about to answer when Victoria looked up from her phone. Her expression had changed. It's out, she said. Her voice was level, but something behind it wasn't. Drew just sent me. The Chronicle and 2 wire services. Official announcement from Centurion Energy. She turned the phone so Nathan could see the screen. The headline was large. Centurion Energy acquired for $4.2 billion. Founders and co-founder to share historic equity payout. Below it, 3 names. Elliot Marsh, David Cho, Nathan Cole. Below those names, a number Nathan had known in the abstract for months, but which looked different in a news headline, in a courthouse hallway, with Sandra and Victoria both watching his face. His equity stake, precisely detailed, in the specific language of a corporate announcement, a number with 8 figures. Sandra read it over his shoulder. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said with complete composure, I need 5 minutes to revise my closing argument. She walked to the end of the hallway and started writing on her legal pad, fast. Nathan looked at the headline for another moment. Then he lowered the phone. Victoria was still watching him. Are you okay? She asked, the same way she'd asked it before, not clinical, genuinely asking. My name is in the headline, he said. Yes. In a real newspaper? Several real newspapers. She paused. How does that feel? He thought about 8 years of choosing quiet. 8 years of step-backs and protocol, and 2-word messages and spiral notebooks and a cot in a garage in November. He thought about Lily's voice on the phone at 7:30 every night. Complicated, he said. She nodded, like that was the right answer, like she'd expected exactly that. The courtroom is going to know within the hour, she said. Probably less. Patricia Dell has associates monitoring the wires. She'll know before we go back in. I know. Nathan. She waited until he looked at her. Whatever happens in that room, what you did, how you did this, that's what matters. Not the headline. He looked at her for a moment. In the fluorescent light of the courthouse hallway with Sandra writing 20 feet away and the clock moving toward the end of the break, he registered something he'd been registering for weeks and choosing not to examine, that Victoria Sterling was a person who told him difficult truths without softening them, who showed up without calling ahead, who spent her own money and her own time on a problem that wasn't technically hers and never asked him to thank her for it, that she had treated him from the first meeting in the coffee shop not like a damaged thing to be managed, but like a capable person with a specific problem that could be solved. He had not had that from many people in the past year. Thank you, he said. I know I keep saying that. You do keep saying that, she said. And then, more quietly, you're welcome. Every time. When they went back into the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. Patricia Dell had received the news during the break. He could see it in the slight recalibration of her posture, the way she leaned over and said something to her associate in a low voice that the associate wrote down quickly. Claire had received it too, apparently. She was sitting very still in a way that was different from her earlier stillness, not contained so much as suspended, like someone who has just heard something and is still in the process of understanding what it means. Judge Park entered and looked at both tables. I see we have some new publicly available information, she said, with the particular dryness of someone who had anticipated this. Ms. Coe, Sandra rose. Yes, Your Honor. This morning, Centurion Energy released an official announcement confirming its acquisition and naming its 3 founders, including the petitioner, Nathan Cole. I'd like to enter the announcement into the record. She handed it to the clerk. I believe this information is directly relevant to the fraud claim. As it confirms the financial motive underlying the scheme, the petitioner has been unable to describe directly due to legally binding confidentiality obligations that have now been released. I'll allow it, Judge Park said. Dell rose immediately. Your Honor, the timing of this announcement should not be allowed to— Ms. Dell, sit down, Judge Park said, not unkindly, but without room for debate. I'm going to hear from Mr. Cole directly. Nathan had known this was possible. Sandra had prepared him for it. He stood up anyway, and it felt different from how he'd expected it to feel. Not triumphant, not even particularly relieved. Just real. The way something feels when it stops being an abstraction and becomes a thing you are actually standing inside. Judge Park looked at him. Mr. Cole, I've read the evaluations and the settlement terms and the fraud evidence your attorney has submitted. I've now read the announcement that was released this morning. I'm going to ask you to tell me, in your own words, what happened. He took a breath, and he told her. Not the legal version, not the careful, circumspect version he'd been constructing in his head for months. The actual version, from the beginning, from the Delaware lab and the patent, and the choice to step back when Lily was born, through the divorce filing and the beige conference room, and the signing that he'd done willingly because fighting over a house and a car was the wrong kind of energy to spend when his daughter needed a father who was paying attention to the right things. He told her about Gerald Fitch saying, let it go, and not explaining the motion that had moved the evaluation up by 4 months. He told her about the cot in Bay 3 and the spiral notebook and the 7:30 phone calls, and Lily saying elephants are scared of bees, Dad. It means being big doesn't mean you're not scared of things. He hadn't planned to include that part. It came out anyway. He told her about the confidentiality agreement and what it had prevented him from saying, and what that silence had cost him in a courtroom where the rules required him to account for his financial position without being able to explain the most important piece of it. He told her, without looking at Claire, about the daughter's dentist appointment. He'd sat in the back office of a garage and missed. Not because he was absent or uninvested or unstable, but because someone had structured a legal arrangement to minimize his access to his own child in a window of time when they believed he could do nothing about it. When he stopped talking, the courtroom was quiet enough that he could hear the fluorescent light above the gallery humming. Judge Park was looking at him steadily. Mr. Cole, she said, I'm going to ask you one question directly. Yes, Your Honor. What do you want? He understood she wasn't asking about money or property or legal remedies. She was asking the specific question that courtrooms rarely asked, and that he had been asked in various forms throughout this entire process, by Gerald Fitch and by Dr. Ingalls, and by Sandra and by Claire's attorney, and to which he'd always given some version of the careful answer, the strategic answer, the answer that kept the right doors open. He gave her the other one. I never cared about the house, he said, or the car. I signed everything they put in front of me because none of it was what mattered. He paused. I only wanted my daughter. The words were simple enough that they didn't need anything around them. No elaboration, no context, just there, in the room, in the quiet. Judge Park looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the documents in front of her. Patricia Dell asked to respond. Judge Park gave her 7 minutes. Dell argued competently. Context, ambiguity, the instability of Nathan's current living situation relative to the stability Lily experienced in Claire's home. Dell was not wrong that the stability question was real. She was wrong, Nathan thought, about what stability actually meant, what it was made of, who had built it and who had dismantled it. But he didn't say that. It wasn't his turn. Judge Park let Dell finish. Then she looked at both tables for a long moment, in the particular way of a judge who has made up her mind and is giving the room one final moment before she announces it. This court, she said, does not take findings of fraud in custody proceedings lightly. The evidence submitted today, the procurement irregularities, the payment to the petitioner's former attorney, the communications from Halcyon Advisory Group, and the now public information about the petitioner's financial position, collectively paint a picture of coordinated interference in a family court matter for financial gain. Mas kis sa I pansin, she paused. I want to be precise about what this court is and is not finding today. This court is not making a final determination on all elements of the fraud claim. That will require further proceedings. What this court is finding, based on the evidence before me, is that the custody evaluation process in this case was compromised, and that the current custody arrangement was established under circumstances materially affected by that compromise. Dell leaned forward slightly. The motion to modify visitation to supervised status, Judge Park said, is denied. A breath released somewhere behind Nathan. Victoria, probably. Furthermore, Judge Park continued, this court is ordering an immediate review of the custody arrangement to be completed within 30 days, with a temporary modification granting equal parenting time effective immediately, pending that review. Nathan sat very still. Equal parenting time. Effective immediately. He pressed his hands flat on the table. Not to show anything, just to have something solid to press against. This court is also referring the evidence of attorney misconduct to the State Bar Association and the communications evidence to the County District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal fraud charges. Judge Park looked at both tables one more time. I expect full cooperation from all parties with the review process. I expect the 30-day evaluation to be conducted by an independent evaluator appointed by this court, not from the county contracted program. She closed the folder in front of her. We're adjourned. The gavel came down. What happened next was not a single moment, but a sequence of small ones that Nathan would remember separately and in no particular order. Sandra's hand on his arm, briefly, the closest she'd come to an emotional gesture since he'd met her. Patricia Dell turning to Claire and saying something in a low voice. Claire sitting very still, hands in her lap, not looking at Nathan or at anyone else in particular, with an expression that he couldn't entirely read from across the room, but that looked complicated. Not satisfied. Not defeated in the way he'd imagined. Something more interior than that. Victoria was beside him when he stood up. She didn't say anything for a moment. She didn't need to. Equal parenting time, he said, saying it out loud to make sure it was real. Effective immediately, she said. He nodded. He was doing the same thing he'd done in the beige conference room in November, when he'd signed everything and tried not to show what it cost him. The specific effort of holding your face still when what's happening is the opposite of that moment. When, instead of something being taken, you're watching it come back. He was less successful at it now. He wasn't sure he cared. I need to call Lily, he said. She's in school, Victoria said. I know. I'll leave a message. She listens to her messages at lunch. He pulled out his phone. She needs to hear my voice today. Victoria stepped back to give him space. He turned toward the wall of the courtroom, away from the movement of people gathering papers and filing out, and he called Lily's school phone, the small one he'd gotten her for Christmas, simple and durable, that she kept in her backpack. And he left a message. Hey, Bug, he said. I just wanted to call and tell you something good happened this morning. I'll explain it when I see you, which is going to be a lot more now. His voice caught slightly on that. He let it. I love you. Call me when you can. He hung up and stood facing the wall for another moment. Then he turned around. The courtroom had mostly cleared. Sandra was packing her files with the brisk efficiency of someone who had 3 more things on her calendar and was already mentally in the next one. Patricia Dell was gone. The associate was gone. Claire was still sitting at her table. She was alone now, Dell having stepped out, and she was looking down at the documents in front of her with an expression that Nathan finally recognized from across the emptying room. It was shame. Not performed, not strategic, just the thing itself, sitting on her face without cover. He hadn't expected to feel anything about that. He'd thought he'd moved past the territory where Claire's internal state was something he tracked. He was wrong about that, but only partially. He felt something, but it was smaller than anger and less clear than sympathy, and he couldn't name it with any precision, so he let it be unnamed and walked toward the exit. He stopped at the door. He turned back. Claire? She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but something in them was working hard to stay that way. He didn't know what he was going to say until he said it. She needs you too. Whatever happens in the review, she needs both of us. He paused. I need you to remember that. Claire looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said quietly. He nodded. He left. In the hallway, Victoria and Sandra were talking. Low, fast, the kind of conversation that was already about what came next. Sandra was listing things. The district attorney referral, the parallel civil suit against Halcyon, the bar proceeding, the 30-day evaluation. The infrastructure of aftermath, the work that didn't stop just because the most important moment of the morning was over. Nathan stood in the hallway outside the courtroom and breathed. Just for a moment. Darnell was in the parking lot when Nathan came outside. He was standing next to his truck with his hands in the pockets of his jacket, which was not something he'd mentioned he was planning to do. Nathan stopped when he saw him. "What are you doing here?" "Renata told me to come," Darnell said. "She said somebody ought to be here." "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." He looked at Nathan's face and read whatever was on it. "How'd it go?" "Equal parenting time," Nathan said, effective immediately. Darnell looked at him for a moment. His expression went through several things quickly, and then it settled into something simple and solid. He put his hand on Nathan's shoulder, brief, firm, and then took it away. "Good," he said. "Yeah," Nathan said. They stood in the February cold for a moment. The parking lot was half empty. The sky was the color of old chalk, flat and low. "I owe you an explanation," Nathan said, "about all of it, about everything I haven't been able to tell you." "You owe me a transmission on the Buick in Bay 4, Darnell said. "The rest can wait until you're ready." Nathan looked at him. Darnell was looking at the sky with the expression of a man who had decided not to make this moment more elaborate than it needed to be, and Nathan recognized this as one of the better qualities a person could have. "The Centurion announcement came out this morning," Nathan said. Darnell was quiet. "I'm going to be okay," Nathan said. "Financially, better than okay." "I figured," Darnell said. "You've had the look of someone with a specific kind of patience for about 3 months, the kind that knows something. You figured." "I'm not an idiot, Nathan." "I know you're not." Darnell looked at him sideways. "What are you going to do?" Nathan looked at the courthouse building, at the parking lot, at the gray February sky over Maryland. "Get Lily this weekend," he said, "for a full weekend, 2 nights. And after that?" He thought about it. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "Figure it out one piece at a time." Darnell nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable approach." Victoria appeared at the courthouse doors, portfolio under her arm, phone to her ear, already in the next conversation. She saw Nathan in the parking lot and held up one finger, 1 minute, and turned slightly away, finishing the call. Darnell watched her. Then he looked at Nathan. "She's the one who started all this?" "She's the one who asked the right questions." "Seems like a useful person to know." "She is," Nathan said. And then, after a moment, with more honesty than he'd intended, "She is." Darnell looked at him with the specific expression of an old friend who has just received a piece of information they are going to file away very carefully and say nothing about for a while. "Uh-huh," he said. "Don't. I'm not doing anything." "You're doing the face." "I don't have a face." Victoria came down the courthouse steps and crossed the parking lot. "The DA's office wants the Halcyon materials by end of day Friday," she said to Nathan, and then looked at Darnell. "Victoria Sterling." "Darnell Washington," he said, shaking her hand. "I own the garage." "I know," she said. "Nathan talks about you." "Does he?" Darnell looked at Nathan with barely concealed satisfaction. "Can I borrow him for an hour?" Victoria asked Darnell. "We need to go through next steps while Sandra's available." "He's all yours," Darnell said. "Tell him about the Buick in Bay 4. He got in his truck. "Good to meet you, Victoria." She watched the truck pull out. "What's wrong with the Buick in Bay 4? "Transmission," Nathan said. "Is that bad?" He looked at her. "Depends on how long you've been ignoring it." She blinked. "You said that to me once before. It keeps being true." Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one, which Nathan had learned was, for Victoria Sterling, essentially the same thing. "Come on," she said. "Sandra's waiting." He fell into step beside her. The parking lot was cold and the sky was flat, and somewhere across the county, Lily was eating lunch and checking her messages and about to hear her father's voice telling her that good things happened this morning, that things were changing, that she would see him soon. The day was not over. There was more work ahead. The review, the civil suit, the DA referral, the 30-day evaluation with an independent evaluator, the careful rebuilding of everything that had been deliberately unmade. None of it was finished. Most of it, in fact, was just beginning. But equal parenting time, effective immediately. Nathan Cole walked across a courthouse parking lot in February with that in his pocket, and it was enough to keep walking. Lily called back at 12:17. Nathan was sitting in a conference room with Sandra and Victoria, going through the materials for the DA referral, when his phone buzzed on the table and Lily's name came up on the screen. He picked it up immediately, which he almost never did in the middle of a meeting, and Sandra paused mid-sentence and Victoria stopped writing, and neither of them said anything about it. "Dad." Her voice was slightly breathless, the way it got when she'd been running, which she probably had been, from the cafeteria to the hallway where the reception was better, most likely. He knew her logistics. "Hey, Bug. Something good happened?" "Something good happened." A pause. He could hear the background noise of an elementary school at lunch, distant voices, a tray clattering somewhere. "How good?" "Pretty good," he said. "I get to see you more." The pause that followed was brief and complete, the pause of a child processing information that matters. "How much more?" she said. "A lot more. Half the time." Another pause, longer, then, "Half like, actually half? Like equal?" "Equal," he said. He heard her exhale. It was not a dramatic exhale. It was the quiet kind. The kind that happens when something you've been holding tightens, releases without fanfare, which is how real relief usually sounds. "Okay," she said. Her voice was careful in a way that meant she was trying not to sound as affected as she was, which she'd gotten from him and which he recognized with a complicated kind of pride. "Okay, Dad." "Okay," he said. "Can I still come this weekend?" "Yes." "Can we make food on the hot plate?" "We can make food on the hot plate." "Okay." Another breath. "I have to go back. Mrs. Carver gets weird if we're in the hallway too long." "Go. I'll talk to you tonight." 7:30, she said, like she was confirming an appointment, like it was the fixed point she oriented everything else around, which, he understood, it was, for both of them. 7:30, he said. She hung up. He set the phone down on the conference table. Sandra was looking at her legal pad. Victoria was looking at him. "Sorry," he said. "Don't apologize," Sandra said without looking up. Where were we? They were somewhere. He found it. They kept going. The next 30 days were not easy, but they were a different kind of hard than the previous 3 months had been. The previous kind had been the hard of waiting, of holding still while things you couldn't control moved around you. This kind was the hard of motion, of a situation breaking open and requiring constant navigation. The 30-day custody review. The DA referral, which became an actual investigation within 2 weeks, a development that sent a visible tremor through the network of people who had built themselves comfortable positions on the assumption that no one was paying close enough attention. The civil suit against Halcyon Advisory Group, which Sandra filed with the systematic satisfaction of a person who had been waiting a long time to file exactly this kind of suit. Marcus Hale hired 4 attorneys. Nathan counted them at the one moment their paths crossed in a courthouse corridor. 4 men in expensive suits walking in close formation, a show of legal force that was also, Nathan understood, a show of anxiety. You didn't need 4 attorneys if you were confident. Hale himself did not look at Nathan when they passed. He kept his eyes forward and his jaw set and his expensive suit perfectly pressed. And Nathan watched him go and felt something that was quieter than he'd expected. Not satisfaction, exactly, though there was an element of that. More like the feeling of setting down something heavy that you've been carrying so long, you stopped noticing the weight. He didn't say anything to Hale. There was nothing worth saying, and more importantly, there was nothing Hale had that Nathan wanted. Not anymore. Possibly not ever. Sandra called him 3 weeks after the hearing with the development that she delivered in the flat, efficient voice she used when she was managing her own reaction to something. The DA's office has issued a target letter to Marcus Hale, she said. Financial fraud, conspiracy to commit custody fraud, and potentially wire fraud given the interstate nature of some of the communications. This is real, Nathan. Not just civil exposure. He sat down. He was in the back office of the garage. He was still living there, still working for Darnell, because that hadn't changed yet, and he wasn't in a hurry to change it before he was ready. What happens now? His attorneys will negotiate. He may take a plea. He may fight it. Either way, the investigation is public record now, which means the press will pick it up. The press did pick it up. Not immediately, not that week, but within 10 days, the story had made it into 2 regional papers and a legal trade publication. And then a reporter at a Baltimore outlet connected the Hale investigation to the Centurion acquisition story and the combination: wealthy real estate developer, billion-dollar energy company, custody fraud, a mechanic in a garage who turned out to be a co-founder worth hundreds of millions, was exactly the kind of story that spread. Nathan did not speak to the press. He'd made that decision before any of it became public, and he held to it. Sandra fielded calls on his behalf and redirected them with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had better things to do. Victoria's name appeared in 2 articles as the investor and philanthropist, whose welfare oversight review uncovered the alleged scheme, which she also did not comment on, for reasons Nathan understood were her own and didn't push. The independent custody evaluator, a man named Dr. James Osei, appointed by Judge Park, who arrived at Delmarva Auto on a Tuesday morning in March, with the kind of thorough, unhurried attention that Dr. Ingalls had conspicuously lacked, spent 4 hours with Nathan. He interviewed Pete, which surprised everyone, including Pete. He spoke with Darnell and Renata. He reviewed the school records Sandra had submitted and the character statements and the 7:30 call logs Nathan had printed out from his phone records. 4 months of them, unbroken, every night at 7:30 except the 3 nights Lily had called him first. Dr. Osei looked at those logs for a long time. "Every night," he said. "Every night," Nathan said, "including holidays." "She wanted to call on Christmas," Claire agreed. Dr. Osei wrote something. Nathan had learned with Dr. Ingalls to watch what evaluators wrote and when. Dr. Osei wrote in moments that felt, unlike Ingalls, like genuine registration rather than box checking. "Tell me about the hot plate," Dr. Osei said. Nathan blinked. "Sorry?" "Your daughter mentioned it in our conversation. She talked about it for several minutes, the hot plate you cook on. She seemed to consider it significant." Nathan thought about Lily standing at the hot plate in Bay 3, very seriously stirring something that was technically soup but had evolved through several additions into something more complicated, explaining to Nathan that the reason it was better than a regular stove was because you had to focus. "She decided it was a feature," Nathan said, "not a limitation." "What do you think it is?" He considered that. "Both," he said, "depending on the day." Dr. Osei almost smiled. He wrote something down. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I want to ask you something I don't normally ask in these evaluations, because the normal questions don't quite seem adequate to your situation." "Ask it." "What do you think your daughter has learned from watching you go through this?" The question sat in the room for a moment. Nathan looked at the wall where the battery-powered lights still ran along the top, where the 2 framed drawings hung. The original stick figures and a newer one Lily had made in February, a more ambitious piece that showed what she said was the garage at night, though it looked somewhat abstract. The horses in the margins of her books, the pretzels and the specific brand he'd learned to stock. "I think she's learned that things fall apart sometimes," he said slowly, "and that falling apart doesn't mean you're done." He paused. "I think she's learned that some people leave and some people stay, and the ones who stay aren't always the ones you expected. And I think she's learned—" He stopped, started again more carefully. "I think she's learned that her father loves her in a way that doesn't depend on what house he lives in or what car he drives. And I genuinely hope, that that's the thing that stays." Dr. Osei wrote for a longer time than usual. The evaluation report came back in 2 weeks. Nathan didn't read it before Sandra called to tell him what it said. He'd asked her to do it that way, to just call him, because he didn't trust himself to read it alone in the garage and respond proportionately to whatever was in it. Sandra called on a Thursday morning. "Joint legal and physical custody, equal parenting time, primary residence alternating on a 2-week schedule," she said. "Dr. Osei's report describes you as, and I'm reading directly here, a father whose commitment to his daughter's well-being and emotional security is evident across every dimension of this evaluation, and whose temporary living circumstances are in no way indicative of his capacity or fitness as a parent." Nathan stood in Bay 3 and looked at the battery-powered lights and said nothing for a moment. "He also notes," Sandra continued, and her voice had shifted slightly, carrying something that was not quite warmth, because Sandra did not really do warmth, but was adjacent to it. That Lily, when asked who she wanted to spend more time with, said, "And again, I'm reading directly. Both of them. I want equal, like a fair thing." He pressed the phone against his ear. "Equal, like a fair thing," he said. "She's 8 years old," Sandra said, and she apparently knew the word equal very specifically. "She's been using it since the hearing," Nathan said, "since I told her what the judge ordered. She asked me what equal meant in that context, and I explained it, and she decided it was the right word for what she wanted. Smart kid." "Yeah," he said, "she is." The hearing to finalize the evaluation took 40 minutes. Judge Park reviewed Dr. Osie's report, asked 3 questions, and made the arrangement permanent. Claire's new attorney, Patricia Dell, raised no objections. Claire herself sat at the table without speaking, and Nathan sat at his, and the strange formality of a courtroom was the container for a moment that felt too large for it. When it was over, Nathan stood in the hallway outside the courtroom for the second time in 6 weeks, and this time there was no specific feeling he could isolate and name. It was a mixture, relief and grief, and something that wasn't quite either of those but lived in the same neighborhood. The feeling of a door closing that you needed to close, but that had been part of your house for a long time. He was still standing there when Claire came out. She stopped when she saw him. Her attorney was behind her, talking on a phone, giving them a moment that was probably accidental. "Nathan," she said. "Claire." She looked older than she had in November. Not dramatically, just around the eyes and the set of her jaw. The particular aging that happens not from years but from specific events. "I need to say something," she said. He waited. "I didn't know all of it," she said. "About Marcus, about what he'd done, the full extent of it. I knew things were being managed. I told myself that managing things was what people with resources did and that it wasn't the same as—" She stopped. "That's not an excuse. I'm not saying it as an excuse." "I know," he said. "I'm saying it because Lily deserves parents who can be in the same room without—" She gestured vaguely. "Without all of this between us." He looked at her. She was not asking for forgiveness in any explicit way. She was not, he thought, at the stage where that word was available to her yet. What she was doing was something smaller and more immediate and possibly more honest, acknowledging that there was a child who needed her parents to function, and that functioning required her to say something to him in a courthouse hallway, even if it was hard. He respected that, even if it wasn't enough to undo anything. "I know," he said again. "I'm not interested in making this harder than it has to be, for her." "Okay," she said, and then quieter. "She told me you left the lights up in the garage, that you didn't take them down after she put them up." "No," he said, "I didn't." Claire looked at him for a moment with something in her eyes that he chose not to examine too closely. "Okay," she said again. She walked away. Her attorney fell into step beside her. Nathan watched them go and then turned toward the other end of the hallway, where Sandra was packing files and Victoria was standing near the window, looking out at the parking lot with the early March light on her face. He went to stand beside her. They stood there for a moment without saying anything, looking out at the ordinary view of a courthouse parking lot on a Thursday morning. "It's done," he said. "Most of it," she said. "The Hale case is still running." "I know, but this part—" She turned to look at him. "Yes," she said. "This part is done." He'd been thinking for the past few weeks about something he wanted to say to her and hadn't found the right form for. It was not, he'd decided, a grand thing. Victoria Sterling was not a person who responded well to grand things. He'd learned that about her over months of watching how she moved through the world, efficient and direct, skeptical of ornamentation. She valued accuracy. She valued the specific concrete truth over the broad decorative one. "You didn't have to come back," he said, "after the first meeting. You could have filed your report with the Oversight Committee and moved on." "I know." "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car was pulling slowly out of a parking space with the specific difficulty of someone who'd parked too close to the line. "Because the thing that keeps this kind of thing happening," she said finally, "is people deciding it's not their problem once the obvious part is done. Filing the report and moving on is exactly what the people who did this counted on. Everyone having enough on their plate to not look too carefully." She paused. "I had room to look carefully. So I did. That's the efficient answer, he said. She glanced at him sideways. What's the inefficient one? He looked at the parking lot. That you came back because you wanted to. She didn't say anything for a moment. Yes, she said. That too. He nodded slowly. Outside, the car had finally freed itself from the parking space and was moving away. I'm buying the building, he said. The garage. Darnell's been trying to offload the property for 2 years. He owns it outright, and the land alone is worth more than he's sitting on, and the building needs work. I'm going to buy it from him at a fair price and renovate it. He looked at her. Not because I have to live there anymore. Because it means something. She studied him. What does it mean? It means that the place where I rebuilt my life doesn't become a parking lot or a chain tire shop. He paused. Darnell kept the lights on for me for 4 months. That should count for something material. What are you going to do with it? Keep running it as a shop. Expand it. Hire more people. There are a lot of people in this county who need steady work and who can learn mechanical skills. I know what it feels like to have a practical skill and no platform to apply it. He thought about Pete, 43 words at the beginning and 67 by the end, working in quiet, faithful daily competence on other people's broken things. He thought about Carlos and his Bluetooth speaker and his excellent taste in music. I want to build something that lasts longer than I do. Something with someone else's name on it besides mine. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's not what most people do when they come into significant money. I'm not most people. No, she said. You're not. The way she said it was simple and specific, not a compliment designed to land in any particular way. Just an observation, stated as fact. He had learned that this was how Victoria Sterling meant things, directly, without extra material around them. I'd like your help, he said. Not the money kind. You've spent enough of that. The other kind, the kind you're actually good at. Looking at systems and figuring out what's broken and asking the questions nobody else is asking. She looked at him. You want me to consult on a garage renovation? I want you to help me figure out what an expanded auto and technical training program could look like. The county has funding gaps I've already identified. There are partnership models with community colleges that haven't been tried here. And you know how to make things work at scale. I know how to make certain things work at scale, she said carefully. Auto training programs are not my area. No, but systems are, and people are. She was quiet for another moment. That's a reasonable ask, she said finally. I know. I'll think about it. Okay. A beat of silence. Then she said, at a slight angle, Nathan. Yeah. You should probably also eat a real meal at some point. Sandra told me you've been surviving on hot plate soup for 4 months. Sandra talks too much. Sandra is worried about you. She doesn't say it that way because she doesn't do sentiment, but that's what it is. She paused. I know a place in Annapolis that makes actual food, if you can remember what that tastes like. He looked at her. She was looking at the parking lot with a studied casualness that he recognized as the exact opposite of casual, and which he found, against his better judgment, somewhat affecting. That's an efficient way to ask something, he said. She turned to look at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked something that might be called uncertain. Briefly, just for a second, before the familiar steadiness settled back in. I have a lot of practice being efficient, she said. I know, he said. Dinner sounds good. The Hale case moved through the legal system the way these things do. Not quickly, not cleanly, with delays and motions and the specific expensive friction generated by 4 attorneys who were billing by the hour and had every incentive to extend the process. But it moved. By summer, a plea agreement was on the table. By early fall, Marcus Hale had accepted reduced charges in exchange for cooperation, financial restitution, and the kind of legal record that followed a person into every room they entered for the rest of their professional life. His real estate company did not survive the reputational damage intact. Projects stalled. Partners withdrew. The particular ecosystem that had sustained him, the donations, the board memberships, the careful network of people who made each other's problems manageable, those people are surprisingly fast at deciding they never knew you well when your name starts appearing in the wrong headlines. The county contracted evaluator program was dismantled and rebuilt under new oversight. 3 other custody cases from Dr. Ingalls' evaluation history were reopened for review. Two of them resulted in modifications. The procurement process that had created the program in the first place became the subject of a county council investigation that Nathan followed at a distance, with the specific detached attention of someone who no longer needed the outcome for himself, but understood it mattered to other people who were less visible. Gerald Fitch surrendered his law license in August. He did not contest the bar proceeding. Nathan felt less about that than he'd expected to. Fitch had been a vehicle, not an architect. Punishing the vehicle without understanding the road felt insufficient, and the road was being dealt with through channels that didn't require his personal investment of feeling. He had other things to invest feeling in. The renovation of Del Marva Auto and Technical Center, which is what it became, 6 months after Nathan bought the property from Darnell for a number that made Darnell uncomfortable, until Nathan pointed out that the discomfort was misplaced, and Darnell had earned every dollar several times over, was a project that occupied Nathan in the way that good projects do, the kind that require enough of you that there's no remaining capacity for the kind of late-night thinking that leads nowhere useful. He hired an architect. He hired a contractor. He sat in meetings and argued about square footage and HVAC and ADA compliance and the placement of windows in the training bay, and these arguments were, in their way, exactly what he needed: concrete, solvable, advancing toward a specific outcome. Pete stayed. Of course, Pete stayed. He was given the title of senior technician and a raise that he accepted without comment, but which made him, for 2 consecutive days, slightly more talkative than usual, which meant he reached about 90 words both days, which Nathan tracked in his head with genuine fondness. Carlos stayed too, and brought his Bluetooth speaker and his music opinions, and a cousin named Marco who turned out to be exceptional with electrical systems and was hired within the first month of the expanded operation. Darnell didn't leave either, which Nathan had hoped for but hadn't asked for directly, not wanting to presume. Darnell showed up at the renovation site on a Saturday morning in May with coffee and a measuring tape and said, "You're going to put the alignment rack in the wrong place. Move it 6 feet north." The architect said, "The architect has never aligned a car," Darnell said. "Move it 6 feet north." Nathan moved it 6 feet north. It was the right call. Victoria came by on a Tuesday in July when the construction was about half done. She stood in the middle of the main bay in a hard hat that she wore at a slight angle that she was unaware of, looking at the exposed framing and the new windows and the layout that was beginning to be visible. "It's going to be good," she said. "It's going to be chaotic for another 3 months," Nathan said. "Then it's going to be good." That's usually how it works. She'd been coming by roughly once a week, sometimes less, sometimes more. The dinner in Annapolis had been followed by other dinners, not in any dramatic declarative sequence, but in the natural accumulation that happens when 2 people keep finding that they want to be in the same space, for reasons that start practical and gradually stop being primarily practical without either person feeling the need to make a formal announcement about it. He was not good at this, he had told her honestly, early on. He was out of practice, and the last time had ended badly, and he had a daughter whose stability was his first priority, full stop. She had told him, with equal honesty, that she had a documented history of prioritizing work over personal life in ways that she was trying to understand and adjust, and that she was also out of practice, and that she found most aspects of conventional romantic pacing somewhat baffling but was willing to figure it out if he was. He had said that was the most practical approach to a personal conversation he'd ever witnessed. She had said she was aware that was a problem. They had figured it out, imperfectly and without a particular plan, which Nathan thought was probably the only real way to figure anything out. Lily met her in September. Nathan had prepared for this with the specific anxiety of a parent who knows that children are unpredictable in their reactions, and that there is no approved protocol for the introduction of a person who matters to you into the life of a child who matters more. He hadn't needed to prepare. Lily had looked at Victoria with those gray-green eyes and the considering expression she used when she was forming an opinion, and had said, "Dad says you ask good questions." Victoria had looked slightly surprised. "He told you that?" "He told me that's the most useful thing a person can do," Lily said. "Ask good questions." "What do you think the most useful thing a person can do is?" Victoria asked. Lily thought about it seriously. "Notice things," she said finally. "Most people don't notice things." Victoria had looked at Nathan over Lily's head with an expression that he was fairly sure translated as, "Your daughter is alarming in the best way." He had communicated back through a slight lift of one eyebrow. Yes, I know. They made food on the hot plate that afternoon, all three of them, crowded into the corner of Bay 3 that was still Nathan's space, even though the renovation had given him an actual room with actual walls in the back of the building. He kept the cot. He didn't know why, exactly. Darnell had asked him about it, and he'd said he hadn't gotten around to moving it, which was not entirely true. The real reason was closer to what he'd told Dr. Osei, that falling apart doesn't mean you're done. And the cot was evidence of both halves of that, and he wasn't ready yet to put it in storage. Lily had made soup that was technically soup, but had evolved through additions into something more ambitious, and they ate it at the work table with mismatched chairs, and it was loud and slightly chaotic, and the soup was genuinely good in an unexpected way. And Nathan sat at that table in the garage where he'd spent 4 months rebuilding his life and looked at his daughter, explaining to Victoria why horse anatomy was more complicated than most people realized, and felt something that was large enough that he didn't try to name it. Some things don't need names. They just need to be kept. On the day the technical center officially opened, a Friday in October, with a small event that Nathan had tried to keep quiet, and Renata had expanded into something more substantial despite his objections, because Renata was correct that some things deserved to be marked. Lily asked if she could hang something on the wall. She'd been working on it for 3 weeks. Nathan had seen the early drafts, spread across the floor of Bay 3 with colored pencils and a level of concentration that meant she was serious about it. It was a drawing, larger than her usual ones, on a piece of cardboard she'd gotten from Darnell. It showed 3 figures, and unlike her earlier drawings, the stick figures, the abstract attempts, these had some actual proportion to them, the careful proportion of a child who had been practicing. A man, a little girl, and a woman standing in what was clearly a garage with small points of light running along the top of the wall. She hung it on the wall of the main bay, where everyone could see it, with a thumbtack she'd brought specifically for that purpose. Nathan looked at it for a long moment. The 3 figures were not perfect. The woman was slightly too tall. The little girl's arms were longer than they should be. The man, Nathan, was leaning slightly to one side, which Lily had said was because that was how he stood when he was thinking. "That's how I stand?" he'd asked when she told him that. "Always," she'd said with complete confidence. He looked at the drawing on the wall of the place he'd bought and renovated and opened because some things deserved to be built rather than abandoned. He looked at it next to the battery-powered lights that had been replaced. The original battery pack had finally died in August, and he'd bought new ones, the same type, and strung them the same way, unevenly at Lily's insistence, because uneven was more interesting. Darnell was standing beside him. They stood there looking at the drawing together. "She's getting better," Darnell said. "The horses, especially. She's been practicing every day. Shows." Pete appeared on Nathan's other side, with a cup of coffee he didn't offer to share, which was very Pete. He looked at the drawing for a moment. "Good," he said. Nathan counted. 1 word. But the way Pete said it, the particular weight he put into a single syllable, communicated something that a longer statement would have diluted. "Yeah," Nathan said. "It is." Victoria came to stand beside him later, after the small speeches were over and the food Renata had brought was mostly eaten, and the staff and their families and a few county officials who'd come out of obligation and stayed out of genuine interest were scattered through the bright new space of the main bay. She stood next to him looking at Lily's drawing. "She made it look like a home," Victoria said. He looked at the drawing, the small lights, the 3 figures, the proportions that were almost right. "It is," he said. There were things he still hadn't fully sorted through, and he was honest enough with himself to know it. The grief of what the marriage had been and what it became, that hadn't resolved cleanly and probably wouldn't, not for a long time. The specific loss of years he'd spent waiting that might have been spent differently. He turned that over sometimes at night and didn't come to a clean conclusion about it. There were nights he still woke at 2 a.m. and lay in the dark and thought about all the phone calls at 7:30 and whether he had, in some way he couldn't quite identify, failed to protect Lily from something she should have been protected from. He didn't always get to a comfortable answer. He'd stopped expecting comfortable answers, which was its own kind of progress. What he had arrived at, over the months since the hearing, was something less clean than wisdom and more durable than optimism. Something that was not a lesson, exactly. He distrusted the word lesson because it implied that suffering was primarily educational, which he found insufficient as a framework, but was more like a recalibration, a revised understanding of what things were actually made of. Lily had said it once, without knowing she was saying anything significant. "I'll remember everything. So even when we're not together, you're still there." He thought about that a lot. He thought about what it meant that an 8-year-old had understood something that had taken him considerably longer, that what you build in a person doesn't disappear when the circumstances change, that presence is not primarily about location, that the most important thing you can give someone is not a house or a car or a neighborhood or a school. It's the reliable fact of yourself showing up at 7:30 if that's when you can show up, on a cot in a garage if that's where you have to show up from. They had taken the house. They had taken the car. They had taken most of his visible daily access to his daughter for 4 months. They had calculated, with some precision, every asset he had and stripped him of most of them. What they hadn't calculated was that none of those things were the actual asset. The actual asset was something that didn't appear on a financial disclosure or a property transfer or a custody agreement. It was the thing Lily had been building her orientation around since she was old enough to have an orientation. The specific, undecorated fact of a father who answered the phone, who knew which pretzels she liked, who didn't take the lights down when she put them up, who told her the truth at the level she could handle it, and waited for her to be ready for more. You cannot put that in a document and take it away. You cannot move it to supervised visitation or limit it to every other weekend. It exists in a person, and it transmits through time, and it does not require a particular address. Nathan Cole stood in the main bay of Delmarva Auto and Technical Center on a Friday in October, with his daughter's drawing on the wall and his best friend's hand briefly on his shoulder, and Victoria Sterling next to him, saying something low and specific about the county funding gap she'd identified that morning and how she thought they could close it by spring, already in the next problem, already moving forward. He looked at the drawing. He looked at Lily, across the room, deep in conversation with Pete. Pete, who was using words at a rate Nathan had never seen before, and who appeared to be explaining something about tire pressure with the focused sincerity of a person who had found, unexpectedly, an audience that was genuinely interested. He looked at the battery-powered lights along the wall, uneven and warm. He looked at all of it, and for the first time in a long time, not as a performance, not as a decision he was making, but as a simple physical fact, he was still. Not the stillness of waiting, not the stillness of holding something in, just the ordinary stillness of a person who is exactly where he is, in a garage that smells like motor oil and fresh paint, and the particular combination of people who are building something together and don't entirely know yet what it will become, which is the best time to be building anything. He had been a man sleeping on a cot. He was still, in some sense, that man. The cot was still there, 15 feet away, behind the wall of the room he slept in now. He was also, in ways he was still discovering, something else, not better or worse. Not the version of himself that the newspaper headline described, or the version the divorce settlement had tried to define. Just himself, with all the damage and the patience and the love for a specific 8-year-old girl that had been the fixed point around which everything else had orbited for the past hard year. Some people thought the story was about the money. He understood why. The money was the most legible part of it. The acquisition, the equity stake, the number with 8 figures that made headlines. But money had never been what the story was about. The story was about what holds when everything else lets go. The story was about what you find out you're made of when someone strips away everything that isn't that. The story was about a phone that rang at 7:30 every night in a cold garage, in a city nobody was paying attention to, between a father and his daughter, and what that meant to both of them, and what it built, and how nothing that was done to either of them had managed to get in the way of that specific, stubborn, ordinary love. Lily looked across the room and found her father's eyes, the way she'd been doing since she was old enough to look for him. She grinned, the imprecise, unself-conscious grin of a child who is exactly where she wants to be. He grinned back. That was the whole story. Everything else was context.